the cradle of bone. They said the house at the edge of Briar Hollow never slept. Even when the lights went out and the insects outside fell silent, something inside kept breathing. The walls seemed to inhale and exhale through the cracks, a slow rhythm that rattled the pipes and moaned through the floorboards. Some said it was the wind. Others said it was memory. But to Ethan Harper, it was simply home. Ethan was the kind of man who believed in order. The kind who never raised his voice because his silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. He worked long days at the lumber yard and came home just before sunset, smelling of sawdust and beer. In the evenings, he would sit in his old armchair, boots still on, watching the walls darken around him, while his wife, Marla, moved quietly in the kitchen. Their daughter, Lily, used to peek around the doorway, clutching the edge of her dress like a secret. She was 8, thin and pale, with a softness in her voice that never seemed to fit the harshness of the house she lived in. At first, neighbors thought the bruises on Lily's arms came from climbing trees or falling off her bike. Marla said the same thing, smiling too quickly when she did. No one pressed further. No one wanted to know what really happened when the doors were closed and the night began its long breathing again. Sometimes, after dinner, Ethan played with his baby boy, Billy, the child from his second marriage, the one who had inherited his father's bright eyes and easy laughter. The sound of it filled the living room like sunlight. Lily would stand in the hallway, watching them from the shadows, smiling at the laughter she was not part of. But the moment her father's eyes met hers, her smile would fade. "Go to bed," he'd say, without looking away from Billy. She would whisper something, maybe "good night," maybe "I'm sorry," and retreat up the stairs to the small attic room that smelled of dust and rain. The attic was her world. Its single window looked out onto the cornfields, endless and whispering in the wind. When it rained, drops fell through the crack in the roof and tapped gently against the tin box she kept beneath her pillow. Inside that box were her treasures, a broken marble, a torn piece of blue ribbon, and a paper scrap that said, in her uneven handwriting, "Someday, I'll have wings." Sometimes, as she lay awake, listening to the storm, she would hum softly to herself, a melody, with no tune, no words, just a fragile sound to fill the silence. If anyone had been listening closely, they might have heard something faint joining in, a delicate clinking that didn't belong to any song. One night, Ethan woke to that sound, a small, rhythmic rattle, like beads rolling inside a hollow shell. He sat up, thinking the baby was stirring, but when he checked the crib, Billy was asleep. A tiny hand curled around the blanket, lips parted in a smile. The sound came again, softer now, from the hallway. He followed it, barefoot on the wooden floor, until he reached the attic door. It was open just slightly, as if it had been waiting for him. He thought he heard a giggle then, light and quick, almost swallowed by the dark. "Lily?" he whispered. No answer, only the smell of dust and rain. He shut the door, but as he turned back toward his room, he could have sworn he heard something drag gently across the floor behind him, a small clink, 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 matching his steps. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, catching in the thin layer of dust that always hung in the air. Marla was frying eggs, the radio playing low static in the background. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday," she said quietly. "Maybe you could talk to her, Ethan. Just talk." He didn't look up from his coffee. "She needs discipline, not pity," he said. And that was the end of it. Neither of them noticed Lily standing in the hallway, barefoot, watching them from behind the corner. Her gaze drifted toward Billy, sitting in his high chair, shaking a small rattle in his hand. It was a strange thing, dull and white, the kind of white that looked too natural, too old. Every time the rattle moved, it made a noise that didn't sound quite right, too heavy, too dry, as if something inside it was more than just beads. Lily stared at it for a long time. When it shook, the ceiling above her, the floor of her attic, seemed to creak in answer. That evening, the sky bruised itself into a storm. Thunder crawled over the cornfields, and the lights flickered, then died. Marla had gone to visit her sister, leaving Ethan with the children. He sat by the dying fire, half drunk, half asleep, while rain lashed against the windows. The house breathed louder in the storm. Billy was upstairs. Lily had vanished into silence hours before, but sometime past midnight, Ethan heard movement in the kitchen, soft, cautious, like someone trying not to be caught. He stood, the floor groaning beneath his weight, and made his way toward the sound. There, by the pantry door, a small figure turned. Lily's hair clung to her face, her nightdress soaked through. She looked smaller than he remembered. "I'm hungry, Daddy," she said, voice trembling. For a moment, something in him softened. For a moment, he almost reached out to her, but then he thought of Billy upstairs. The baby, the laughter, the perfect little world he had built around that child, and the softness vanished. What happened next? No one could ever say for sure. The neighbors remembered hearing a sharp noise, maybe a door slamming, maybe thunder. The next morning, no one saw Lily. The attic window was open, the curtains flapping against the wind. Ethan told Marla she'd run away, that she'd been troubled. Marla believed him, or pretended to. Weeks passed. The house grew quieter. Ethan stopped working in the yard and began spending long hours in his workshop, the door locked from inside. When he finally emerged, there was a new toy in Billy's crib. A little rattle, small enough to fit in the boy's hand. Marla said Ethan had made it himself. "He's trying," she told the neighbors, forcing a smile. "He's being a better father now." No one asked where he got the pale material that gleamed in the rattle's handle. No one wanted to know. At night, when Billy shook the toy, a strange sound filled the house. It wasn't music. It wasn't laughter either. It was something dry and hollow, as if each shake stirred the dust of something that used to breathe. Ethan would sit by the window, staring into the dark fields, listening to that sound echo through the rooms, the same rhythm as the breathing the house had always made. He told himself it was just the wind again. But sometimes, when the storm clouds gathered and the night grew heavy, he swore he could hear a voice beneath the rattle's whisper, soft, distant, and unmistakably young, humming a lullaby from the attic that no longer existed. They said the house at the edge of Briar Hollow never slept. Maybe it never could. The morning after the storm, the house looked calmer, though the air still carried a faint odor of damp wood and rust. Henry moved through the kitchen barefoot, each step creaking against the warped floorboards. He hadn't slept. The whisper from the well kept replaying in his head. Bring it back. He wasn't sure what it was. But when he looked out the back window, the old well seemed to stare back at him, silent, patient, waiting. He forced himself to eat something. The cereal was stale, the milk warm, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the sound that came again around 7:30 a.m. A faint clack, 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 from the back porch. At first, Henry thought it was a branch tapping against the siding. But when he stepped outside, the sound stopped. The morning light was gray and thin. The field behind the house was still soaked with rain, and the scarecrow stood crooked, one arm torn away by the wind. He took a few steps forward, the wet grass cold against his feet. Then clack. He froze. The sound wasn't coming from the field. It was coming from below the porch, deep inside the crawl space. He crouched down, lifting the loose lattice panel, and the smell hit him first. Mud, mold, and something faintly metallic. He squinted, and through the darkness, he saw it. A small object hanging from the underside of the porch beam. A rattle. It was crudely made, tied together with string and twigs, filled with what looked like fragments of bone. When the wind passed through the cracks, it shook, producing that dry, hollow sound. Henry reached up to take it down, but the moment his fingers brushed the string, something sharp pricked him. He flinched, pulling his hand back. A bead of blood welled up on his fingertip. He stared at it for a long time, and that's when the whisper came again, but closer this time, right beside his ear. "Don't touch what you don't remember." He jerked his head around, no one there. The porch was empty, the air completely still. He stumbled backward, heart racing, and slammed the lattice shut. For the rest of the morning, the rattle didn't move. It just hung there, quiet. But by afternoon, As the sky darkened again, Henry began to notice something else. Every sound in the house seemed to echo in threes. The faucet dripped 3 times. The floorboards creaked 3 times. And when the clock struck noon, it chimed 3 times, then fell silent, even though it was supposed to ring 12. That night, Henry couldn't bring himself to sleep in his room. He stayed in the living room with the TV on mute, the screen flickering in the dark. Sometime after midnight, he heard the front door handle click. He didn't move. The wind outside had stopped entirely. The silence pressed against his ears, heavy, unnatural. Another click, then a slow creak as the door opened a few inches. The faint light from the TV glimmered against the wet floorboards. He could see the edge of a shadow, someone, or something standing just outside. "Hello?" he whispered. No response. He took a step forward, heart pounding. Then he saw the rattle. It was hanging from the inside of the door now, swaying gently, and beneath it, a trail of wet footprints led toward him. Henry stumbled back, reaching for the lamp, but before he could turn it on, a sharp pain split through his head. Images flashed: dirt, candles, the sound of bones cracking, a voice chanting his name. When he blinked, the rattle was gone. The door was closed, the floor dry. Only his own breath filled the room. But as he pressed his hand to his temple, trying to steady himself, he felt something in his pocket, something small and hard. He pulled it out. It was a fragment of bone, smooth, clean, and carved with the same 3-mark symbol he'd seen on the old Wells stones. Outside, the wind began again, and somewhere far below the porch, the rattle started shaking once more. Clack, clack, clack. By the 3rd day, Henry stopped pretending he could leave. The road beyond his front yard had turned to thick mud from the rain, and every time he tried to start the car, it refused to turn over, just a dull, wheezing sound, as if the engine itself didn't want to wake. The air inside the house felt heavier. He caught whiffs of something sour, like old meat left too long in the Sunday. He tore apart the kitchen looking for the source, checked the sink, the trash, the drains, but everything was clean. Yet the stench persisted, following him room to room. By noon, his reflection in the hallway mirror looked worse than the day before. Dark circles under his eyes, his skin pale with a faint sheen of sweat. He touched the side of his neck and flinched. Beneath his skin, just above the collarbone, something shifted, like a bubble of air or a pulse that didn't belong to him. He leaned closer to the mirror. The thing under his skin twitched again, moving slightly toward his shoulder. He stepped back, breathing hard. That was when the knocking began. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the back door. He froze, the same rhythm that echoed in the rattle sound. Clack, clack, clack. Henry grabbed a kitchen knife and moved toward the back of the house. The knocking stopped, replaced by a faint dragging sound, something scraping across the porch. He pressed his eye to the small window beside the door. Nothing there, just the overgrown yard, the half-collapsed barn, the skeletal scarecrow standing watch. He waited, breath held. Then he saw it. At the base of the porch, steps plates, dozens of them. Old porcelain dishes he didn't recognize, arranged neatly in a circle on the wet grass. Some were cracked, others caked with mud, and each plate held something pale and small. Bones. He could tell by their shape: tiny ribs, finger joints, fragments of a jaw. A feast. Henry stumbled back, slamming the door shut. He didn't realize he was screaming until his voice broke. He wanted to run upstairs, hide, call for help, but there was no phone signal here, not since the storm. So he did the only thing his fear told him to do. He locked every door, every window, and sat in the corner of the kitchen, knife trembling in his hand. For hours he didn't move. The daylight shifted, then dimmed. Shadows stretched long across the floorboards. He could hear the faint clacking again. Faint, but persistent, like the sound of dry sticks being rolled in a child's hand. As night fell, he realized the sound wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was under the house again, something crawling. He could hear it brushing against the floorboards beneath him, circling slowly, dragging the rattle along. Then, from the darkness below, came a voice hoarse and broken, whispering his name. Henry. He froze. The voice was familiar. It was his mother's. He hadn't heard her voice in 10 years, not since the night she disappeared from this same house. They'd never found her body, only her wedding ring near the well. Henry pressed his ear to the floor. "Mom?" A faint laugh answered him. Not kind, not human. "Dinner's ready." He scrambled backward, his heart hammering. The smell of rot grew stronger now, seeping up through the cracks between the planks. Then came the sound of something wet smearing beneath the wood, as though many hands were spreading mud, or blood, or both. The bulb above him flickered once, twice, then went out. For a moment, there was only the dark. And then, through the faint gray light of the window, Henry saw movement, silhouettes forming along the walls, shadowy figures crawling across the ceiling, limbs too long, heads hanging low. They looked like people who had forgotten how to stand upright. One by one, they gathered around him. He tried to back away, but his legs wouldn't move. The air itself seemed thick, pressing him down. The smell was suffocating now, meat, earth, decay. The figures tilted their heads toward him, as if waiting. Then one of them stepped forward, into the faint light. It was wearing a mask made of bone, and around its neck hung the rattle. Henry's voice cracked. "What do you want from me?" The masked figure leaned closer, and through the hollow eye sockets of the bone mask, he saw a glint of wet, living eyes staring back. "You promised," it said. "You were the first to eat." Henry shook his head. "No, I don't remember." "Then remember." The world around him began to shift. The floor seemed to melt into mud. The walls dissolved into the gray light of a different time, a memory, sharp and cruel. He was 10 years old again. The same house, the same storm. His mother kneeling beside the old well, her hands trembling as she held a bowl filled with something thick and red. There were others with her, 5 of them, faces hidden behind bone masks. They stood in a circle, whispering his name as his mother lowered the bowl toward the dark mouth of the well. "Take him," one of them said. "The youngest feeds the soil." But she didn't. She pulled the bowl back, crying, clutching Henry against her chest. "Not him. Please, not him." That's when the chanting grew louder, angrier. The figures closed in. The bowl spilled. The earth opened. And then nothing. The vision snapped away. He was back in the present, gasping, his body slick with cold sweat. The figures were gone. The house was silent again, but on the table before him lay a single plate, porcelain cracked, rimmed with dried blood, and on it, a piece of raw meat, still warm. He didn't know how it got there, didn't want to, but when he turned toward the window, he saw the field again, and the scarecrow now wore his mother's dress. It swayed gently in the night wind, arms stretched wide as if inviting him to come closer. He stood there for a long time, trembling, staring out into the dark. Then, from beneath the floorboards, the rattle began to move again, softly at first, then faster. Clack, clack, clack. And with every sound, the lights in the house dimmed a little more, as if something below was feeding, growing stronger. When the last bulb finally went out, Henry whispered into the dark, "What did I promise?" The voice answered immediately. "You promised to finish the feast." Henry didn't sleep that night. He sat in the kitchen until dawn, staring at the single porcelain plate that hadn't moved since it appeared before him. The meat on it had darkened, crusted at the edges, but it hadn't rotted. It looked preserved somehow, almost alive. Every so often, he thought he saw it twitch. When the first light broke through the window, he decided he couldn't stay still any longer. He needed answers. The storm had passed. The air was sharp and gray. The fields outside glistened with dew, like 1,000 cold eyes staring back at him. The scarecrow still stood in the same place, wearing his mother's faded blue dress. The wind had turned it gently, so that now it faced the house. He felt it before he saw it, that familiar vibration under his feet, the faint clacking that came from somewhere deep below the floorboards. The rattle was awake again, Henry fetched a flashlight and crouched beside the cellar door. The hinges shrieked as he pulled it open. A puff of damp air breathed out, thick with the scent of soil and rust. He hesitated only a moment before stepping down. The stairs creaked under his weight, and with each step, the sound of the rattle grew clearer. Not steady, erratic, desperate, as though something was shaking it back and forth too fast, like a child's hand trembling with fever. When his feet touched the packed earth, he realized how wrong the basement felt. The air wasn't still. It pulsed slowly, like breath. The light from his flashlight struggled to cut through it, as though the darkness had a texture, heavy and fibrous. The beam swept across the old shelves of canned goods, the broken furniture, the damp stone walls. Nothing moved, until something did. In the far corner, behind the remnants of an old boiler, a section of the wall shimmered, not in reflection, but in motion. The surface seemed to ripple slightly, like the inside of a throat. The rattle clacked from behind it. Henry stepped closer. His voice came out hoarse. "Who's there?" The rattle stopped. For a moment there was only silence, then, faintly, a child's whisper. "Are you hungry?" He spun around, flashlight darting across the basement. Nothing. When he turned back to the wall, he noticed something new, an outline of a door, carved crudely into the dirt and stone, just tall enough for a person to crawl through. It wasn't there before. He was sure of it. Something inside him screamed not to open it, but the sound of the rattle started again, faster now, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. He pressed his hands against the outline. The dirt gave way easily, crumbling like old paper. Within seconds, a hole yawned open before him, leading into a tunnel. The smell hit him instantly, sweet and putrid, the smell of decay long buried. He covered his mouth with his sleeve and crawled inside. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing wetter and colder the further he went. He could hear faint dripping somewhere in the dark, like water falling from a great height, and underneath it all, the whispering. Not one voice now, but many layered, murmuring in tones that sounded both human and animal. "Welcome home, Henry. Finish the feast. You were the first to eat." He tried to tell himself he was dreaming, that this was just another hallucination brought on by fear and sleeplessness. But when his hand brushed the tunnel wall, he felt it move. The earth pulsed gently under his palm, like flesh breathing. When he pulled his hand back, it was slick with something dark. He crawled faster, panic driving him. After what felt like forever, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber. The beam of his flashlight shook as he lifted it and revealed what lay before him. Bones. Hundreds of them. They formed a kind of nest, spiraling inward toward a pit at the center. In that pit, something pale gleamed faintly, the rattle. It was larger now. The bones of its frame fused together into a grotesque lattice of ribs and finger bones, still clacking softly in a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the entire chamber. And then, from the shadows opposite him, something began to crawl out. It was shaped like a person, but not quite. Too thin, too long. Its spine curved like an animal's, and as it moved, bones clicked softly beneath the skin, like beads rolling inside a drum. The face, if it could be called that, was smooth, featureless, except for two sunken pits where eyes should have been. And hanging from its neck was his mother's wedding ring. Henry fell to his knees, trembling. "Mom?" The thing tilted its head. When it spoke, the voice came from deep inside its chest, layered with echoes. "You left me in the dark." "I didn't," he gasped. "I was a child." The figure moved closer. With each step, the earth around them seemed to breathe faster, as though the whole chamber was alive. "You ate before the others. You took what was not yours." He shook his head violently. "I don't remember any of that," but he did. Somewhere deep in the buried folds of his mind, the taste of something warm pressed against his lips, his mother crying, the masked figures chanting. The feast. The offering. And him, the child who had been spared. The creature knelt in front of him. "Now you will remember. You will join us beneath." The rattle began to spin on its own, clacking louder and louder, filling the chamber with its unholy rhythm. Henry screamed, covering his ears, but the sound vibrated through his bones. He felt it crawling up his spine, into his skull, until the world shattered into sound and light. When it stopped, everything was still again. He was no longer in the tunnel. He was standing outside, in the field, under the pale dawn sky. The scarecrow was gone. The house loomed silent behind him. In his hand, he clutched something small and smooth. He opened his palm, the rattle, but it was different now. Smaller, lighter. When he looked closer, he realized it was made of his own finger bones, and far away, beneath the earth, something whispered softly, as if pleased. "Welcome home." Morning came pale and heavy, the kind of light that bleaches everything of warmth. The house felt hollow. Henry stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the empty field. The scarecrow was gone. The windmill had stopped turning. Even the birds refused to cross the yard. On the table lay the rattle. It hadn't moved since dawn, but its presence pressed against him like a heartbeat in the walls. Every time he looked away, he swore he could hear it breathe. He'd thought about leaving. He'd even packed a bag, half of it stuffed with meaningless things. A photograph, a lighter, an unopened bottle of bourbon. But the moment he stepped toward the front door, a tremor passed through the floor. A soft, rhythmic thud. 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 Like footsteps from beneath. He froze. The sound moved through the house, slow, deliberate, searching. Then came the whisper. "Don't go. The table is waiting." Henry dropped the bag and ran. Through the living room, up the stairs into the hallway. Every bulb flickered as he passed, the wallpaper curling like it was blistering from heat. When he reached his bedroom, the door swung open on its own. Inside, the air shimmered with dust and shadow. The bed was stripped bare, and sitting in the center of the room, where the window light fell in a dull square, was the plate. The same plate from the night before, only now the meat was gone, replaced by something smaller, whiter. A bone. It was his. The missing joint from his right pinky. His breath caught. He reached for the hand instinctively and felt the gap, the absence. The wound had already sealed over. A scream rose in his throat, but it didn't come out. Something pressed against his chest from the inside, like fingers reaching through his ribs. His heart beat too fast, too hard, the rhythm syncing with the faint clack of the rattle downstairs. He stumbled back, knocking over the lamp. When the bulb shattered, the world seemed to shift around him. The ceiling stretched higher. The walls grew darker, damp with moisture that smelled of soil. He wasn't in his room anymore. He was in the basement again. The tunnel mouth yawned open before him, glowing faintly red. He heard voices chanting low and broken, as if the words were spoken through ruined throats. Feast of the forgotten. Feast of the forsaken. His body moved without permission. Step by step, he walked forward. His feet sank into the earth as though the ground were swallowing him whole. At the end of the tunnel, the chamber waited. The pit of bones had grown. They twisted upward like the ribs of a giant creature, forming the shape of a crude throne. And on that throne sat the figure that wore his mother's ring. The thing smiled, or at least the skin over its face stretched in an imitation of one. "You remember now," it said. Henry shook his head, trembling. "It wasn't me. I didn't do it." The creature tilted its head. "No, you just lived." Images flared in his mind again. The night of the offering, the circle of masked faces, the whispers about hunger and debt. He had been the youngest, the one chosen to survive, the one to carry it forward. The survivor's curse. The rattle began to move again, spinning in midair. Its bones clicked and turned until they formed the outline of a cradle. Within it, something stirred a shape, small as a newborn, covered in ash and fragments of teeth. The creature rose from its throne, bending low, until its hollow eyes met his. "You took life from the forgotten. Now, you will feed them." The chamber pulsed, the air thick with the stench of decay and sweetness. The earth split open beneath his feet. Hands reached out, dozens of them, thin and gray, clutching at his legs. They weren't pulling him down. They were holding him in place. "Please," he whispered, voice shaking. "Let me go." The creature leaned closer. "You've been home all along." Then, in a single motion, it pushed the rattle into his mouth. The bone scraped against his teeth, cutting into his gums. He tried to scream, but the sound became part of the rattling, merging with the rhythm until it was no longer clear where the noise ended and his body began. The light flared white. When it faded, the chamber was empty. The pit of bones was silent. Only the rattle remained, resting in the dirt, its clicking echoing faintly as the wind shifted through the cracks above. 2 weeks later, a real estate agent arrived at the old farmhouse. The buyer, a quiet man from the city, had sent her ahead to inspect the property. She stepped inside, wrinkling her nose at the musty smell. The furniture was gone. The house looked abandoned, except for one thing. In the living room, beneath the window, something hung from the ceiling beam, a rattle made of small, clean bones. It spun gently in the draft. She smiled faintly, taking out her phone to record a note. "Odd little toy," she murmured. "Probably something left by the previous owner." When she stepped closer, her phone caught a whisper in the background of the recording. A child's voice, soft and steady. "Don't touch what you don't remember." She froze, lowering the phone. The rattle had stopped spinning. Then, from somewhere below the floorboards, came a faint sound, like a table being set. The soft clink of plates, the slow rhythm of footsteps, and then the rattle began again. Clack, clack, clack. As she turned to leave, the camera caught the faint reflection of a figure behind her in the window. Tall, pale, smiling with a mouth that wasn't supposed to exist. The recording ended there. No one ever found the agent. The buyer never came, and the house at the edge of the field waits still, its windows dark, its cradle of bone whispering to the wind. When the night grows quiet enough, if you listen closely, you can still hear it. A child's laughter, faint and broken, keeping rhythm with the turning of the earth. Clack, clack, clack. The last witness of room 124. The elevator groaned like something dying. Sarah stood inside it, suitcase in hand, watching the numbers flicker from 1 to 4 with a kind of exhausted patience that only city newcomers seemed to have. She was 27, recently unemployed, and had spent the last of her savings signing a 6-month lease at a place she'd never heard of, Jade Earn Residences. The name sounded almost elegant when she saw it online, with its washed-out photo of a glass building at sunset. But standing there now, in the dim hallway that smelled faintly of dust and metal, Sarah realized the photo must have been taken at least a decade ago. When the elevator doors slid open, a cold breath of air seeped in. The corridor ahead was narrow, lined with beige wallpaper that had long surrendered to damp and fingerprints. Room 124 waited near the end, her new home. She walked slowly, her suitcase wheels clicking across the tiles. Her footsteps echoed in a way that made her feel less alone and more watched. The hallway lights buzzed, pale and flickering, as if reluctant to stay awake. At the end of the corridor, a small wooden desk blocked part of the path. Behind it sat an old man with a ledger. His gray suit was too large for his thin frame, and his hands trembled when he wrote. "Evening," Sarah greeted, trying to sound cheerful. "I'm here for the rental, Sarah Green. Room 124. The old man raised his eyes, watery and tired. "Yes, the new tenant." He spoke as though he had to remind himself of that fact. "You paid the deposit?" "I did." She nodded, offering her phone screen. He waved it away. "I trust you." Then, reaching into a drawer, he produced a set of brass keys tied with a small paper tag. 124 was written in faded ink. "Don't lose this one. The spare went missing a long time ago." Sarah hesitated. "Do you live here too?" He gave a dry laugh that ended in a cough. "I keep the building alive. Someone has to." When she turned toward the corridor again, the man added softly, "If the walls creak, don't mind it. This place remembers people." She pretended not to hear. Room 124 was smaller than she expected, a rectangle of peeling wallpaper. A single window sealed shut with paint. in a bed that looked older than she was. The air smelled faintly of mildew and lemon cleaner, like something sour trying to disguise itself as fresh. She turned the key, heard the click, and stepped inside. For a brief second, it felt like the air changed thicker, closer, as if the room exhaled after being held too long. Sarah opened her suitcase, unpacked the essentials: clothes, laptop, a framed photo of her parents from happier days. She set it on the nightstand and tried not to notice the faint brown stain on the wall behind it. The ceiling fan whirred lazily overhead, spreading a thin veil of cold air. She lay on the bed, letting her body sink into the uneven mattress. "It's not that bad," she told herself. "It's cheap. Temporary. I'll find a job soon." From somewhere above, she heard a dull knock. Then another, like footsteps. She turned her head. The clock on the nightstand blinked 11:47 p.m. The noises stopped. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains. The city outside murmured faintly: cars, a distant siren, a street vendor, shouting something unintelligible. Sarah made coffee in the small kitchenette. The sink gurgled like it was swallowing something reluctant. When she opened the cabinet under it, she saw a piece of cloth stuffed deep inside the pipe gap. Out of curiosity, she pulled at it, but the fabric tore in her fingers stiff, brittle, and brown at the edges. She dropped it quickly, grimacing. The faucet sputtered, spitting out rust-tinted water before clearing. She washed her hands, trying not to imagine where that cloth came from. She decided to take a walk, maybe find a nearby grocery. As she locked the door, she caught sight of something strange. The small mirror hanging on the opposite wall had a faint smear on its surface, like condensation. Yet the hallway was cool, dry. She rubbed at it with her sleeve. The smear vanished, and underneath, for just a second, she thought she saw the outline of another face beside hers. That night, the building seemed quieter, too quiet. Sarah lay awake in bed, scrolling through her phone, reading messages from friends who had slowly drifted out of her life. They sent heart emojis and miss yous, but never visited, never called. She set the phone down, staring at the ceiling fan. The knocking started again, slow, rhythmic. It wasn't coming from above this time. It came from below. She sat up, heart racing. The sound continued: soft thuds against the wooden floor beneath her bed. She swung her legs over the side and listened. For a long, breathless moment, there was nothing. Then, a faint dragging noise, as if something heavy was being pulled across rough boards. Hisking prigel. Probably pipes, she told herself. Old building sounds. She leaned down, gripping the edge of the mattress. Her hand trembled as she lifted the bedsheet, peering into the narrow space beneath. Darkness. Nothing else. She exhaled shakily, lay back down, and closed her eyes. 3 hours later, she woke up gasping. Her throat was dry, and the air felt strangely thick, sour. The faintest smell like rot, like something wet trapped too long, filled the room. She turned on the lamp. The light flickered before steadying. The smell didn't go away. Sarah stepped off the bed barefoot and froze. The floor felt damp. When she knelt to touch it, her fingers came away sticky. A thin brown residue streaked her skin. Her stomach turned. She backed away, clutching her phone, and turned on the flashlight. The light beam passed over the walls, cracked paint, old stains, then the floor, where a faint trail of moisture led toward the bed. Heart pounding, she crouched again and shone the light underneath. Something glinted. It wasn't metal. It was glassy, white. She reached slowly, her fingertips brushing something cold, curved like bone. The next morning, Sarah sat at the reception desk, pale and shaking. The old man looked up from his ledger with concern. "Is something wrong?" "There's a smell," she said, voice hoarse. "And something under the bed. I think there's a leak or..." She stopped, unsure how to phrase it without sounding insane. The old man's hand tightened on his pen. His eyes flicked toward the corridor leading to room 124, then back at her. "You're sure you didn't bring anything with you? Meat, perhaps, or a..." Dead plant? I just moved in yesterday, she snapped. There's something in that room. He stared at her for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. If you want, I can move you upstairs. Sarah hesitated. But what's under there? The man closed the ledger. Some things, he said, are better left under the bed. That night, she didn't sleep. Every sound became sharper, crueler, the hum of the fan, the distant moan of the pipes, the occasional shuffle from the hallway. She sat against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, flashlight gripped tight, around 3 amperes. The smell came back, heavier this time, sweet and rancid, and then, softly, she heard breathing. It wasn't her own. It came from under the bed, slow, labored, wet. She froze, too terrified to move. The breathing stopped. Then, a whisper, almost inaudible, sliding across the room like silk over glass. Stay. Sarah's scream never made it out. When she turned on the flashlight, the space beneath the bed was empty. Only her suitcase sat there, half open, and inside, resting atop her folded clothes, was that same torn piece of brown-stained cloth she'd found under the sink. At dawn, she packed everything and went downstairs. The old man was already waiting, as if he knew. I'm leaving, she said. You can keep the deposit. He nodded. You saw her, didn't you? Sarah paused. Who? His eyes drifted past her, to the staircase that led upward. The woman who never checked out. She left the building without looking back, but later, when she finally settled in a cheap motel across town and went to unpack, she found something wedged in the corner of her suitcase, a small brass key, with a paper tag, Hibarsha, and faintly from somewhere inside the room, she thought she heard the creak of a bed, as if someone had just lain down again. The motel room smelled like bleach and old cigarettes. Sarah sat on the bed, knees drawn up, staring at the brass key she had found wedged in her suitcase. It gleamed faintly in the thin morning light, the number 124 etched into the tag in faded ink. She'd thrown it in the trash twice already, but both times, when she turned back to the table, there it was again, sitting neatly on the nightstand like it had been placed there deliberately by someone who knew where she slept. She didn't sleep much after that. When she did, her dreams were the same. The sound of breathing that wasn't hers, the creak of bed springs, the voice, that single whispered word, stay. It haunted her even now, in daylight. When she checked her phone, she realized she had received a new message. Unknown number, just an image. The same hallway of Jade Urn residences, taken from the end where room 124 stood. The timestamp showed 3:02 a.m., 2 hours ago. Beneath the photo, a single line of text. You left the mirror uncovered. Sarah's throat tightened. She hadn't taken any mirror with her. She hadn't even packed one, but she remembered it now, the small mirror hanging opposite her door in the hallway, the one that had fogged up even when the air was dry. She deleted the message, threw her phone across the bed, and tried to breathe. The city outside her window looked harmless, a blur of morning traffic and distant chatter. Normal, real. She clung to that thought like a rope. Still, that night, when she turned off the lights and tried to sleep, the silence pressed against her in a way that felt familiar. The same silence that had crept through the walls of room 124, heavy, expectant, and from somewhere deep inside the motel's pipes, she thought she heard a single drop of water fall. 2 days passed. She tried to convince herself it was just nerves, trauma, exhaustion. She went out, walked through crowded streets, watched people laugh in cafes, breathe easily. The more she stayed among others, the more the fear faded, until the 4th night, when she returned from a late walk. She found the door to her motel room slightly ajar. Her first instinct was to run. Instead, she stood there, heart pounding, hand frozen on the knob. The door creaked softly as she pushed it open. Everything looked untouched. Her bag was where she'd left it, her clothes folded, her phone charging on the nightstand. But the key, was gone. In its place lay something new, a mirror. Small, square, its edges chipped. It leaned casually against the lamp as if it belonged there. Sarah stared at it. Her reflection stared back, pale and tired, eyes hollow from sleeplessness. For a moment, she almost laughed it had to be a coincidence. Maybe housekeeping left it. Maybe she'd missed it before. Then the reflection blinked. She didn't. Her body went cold. She backed away, eyes locked on the glass. Her reflection was still there, unmoving now, but something was different. The background behind it wasn't her motel room. It was darker. Wallpaper she recognized. Beige, with faint water stains. Jade Urn Residences, room 124. The reflection smiled. She didn't remember screaming, but her throat ached when she came to her senses. The mirror lay face down on the carpet, her lamp knocked over, her suitcase half open. She stumbled toward the bathroom sink, splashed cold water on her face, trying to ground herself in something, anything real. Her phone buzzed again. Another photo. This time, from inside the motel room, she could see herself, standing in front of the mirror, but in the reflection, she wasn't alone. A woman stood behind her, barefoot, hair matted, skin gray and stretched too tightly over her bones. Her head was slightly tilted, as if curious. Sarah dropped the phone. The motel felt smaller, suddenly walls leaning closer, air heavier, lights buzzing like angry insects. She reached for her bag, intent on leaving right then, but the zipper wouldn't move. When she pulled harder, she felt something snag inside. She tore the bag open. The brass key fell out again, still tied with its paper tag. The next morning, Sarah went back. She didn't know why, maybe curiosity, maybe guilt, maybe because nightmares had begun to bleed into waking life. Whatever the reason, she found herself standing once again before the rusted gate of Jade Urn Residences, the same building she swore never to see again. The old man at the desk wasn't there. The ledger sat open, a cup of coffee long gone cold beside it. The air smelled stale, layered with the faint sweetness of decay. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly. Each step groaned like it was remembering pain. The hallway lights flickered overhead, dimming as she approached room 124. The door was unlocked. She hesitated only a moment before pushing it open. Inside, the room was exactly as she'd left it. Same bed, same closed window, same silence pressing against her lungs. Only one thing had changed: the mirror on the wall. It was covered now, draped in a yellowing bedsheet that moved slightly, though there was no wind. She crossed the room, fingers trembling, and pulled the cloth away. For a moment, she saw only herself. Then, like mist rising from inside the glass, another figure began to appear behind her reflection. The outline of a woman with long, dark hair, head tilted, lips slightly parted. Sarah's reflection began to cry, but she wasn't. The woman in the mirror didn't move closer. She just watched. Her eyes were clouded, soft gray pools filled with something unreadable. Sadness or hunger. Sarah reached a hand toward the glass. Her fingertips met the surface, cold, damp. The mirror fogged under her touch, a slow bloom of breath from inside. Then words began to form on the misted surface, traced by invisible fingers. "You stayed." Sarah stumbled backward. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I left." "Him." The mirror pulsed, as if laughing without sound. Her phone vibrated again in her pocket. She didn't want to look, but she did. A voicemail. The sender ID read simply, 124. She pressed play. Static filled the room. Then a voice, distant, muffled, trembling. It was her own voice. "If the walls creak, don't mind it. This place remembers people." Her blood turned to ice. Those were the old man's words. But she had said them. In her voice, in her tone. She dropped the phone. The light in the room flickered violently. When she looked back at the mirror, it was empty. No reflection. No woman, just black. As if the glass had turned into an open doorway. And from that darkness, a single hand reached out. When Sarah woke, she was lying on the floor. The room was quiet again. The mirror hung empty, normal, reflecting only the gray daylight through the window. Her head throbbed. She stood unsteadily, half expecting to see blood, a mark, something, but her skin was untouched. She should have left. She knew that. But something compelled her to stay just a little longer, the same way you stare at the edge of a cliff, just to see what falling would feel like. She moved closer to the mirror again. Her reflection looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, not quite matching her movements. When she raised her hand, the reflection followed a half-second too slow. "Who are you?" she whispered. The reflection smiled faintly, and for the briefest moment, the face behind the glass wasn't hers. That evening, she found the old man sitting on the steps outside the building. His eyes were distant, as though he'd been waiting for her. "You shouldn't have come back," he said simply. "There's someone in that room," Sarah said. "A woman. She's trapped there. I saw her." The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, she was the first tenant, the owner's wife. She died in her sleep, or that's what they said. But the truth is, she never stopped breathing. The mirror, it held on to it. Her last breath, her last scream." Sarah's hands trembled. "The mirror breathes." He looked at her sharply. "You saw it?" "I touched it," she whispered. The old man's voice broke into a whisper. "Then it touched you back." He stood abruptly, backing away. "Go. Don't come here again. You still have a chance." "Others, they didn't." "Others?" His gaze dropped. "They never made it past the reflection." Sarah returned to the motel that night, numb, hollow. She left the lights on, covered every reflective surface, bathroom mirror, window, even the screen of her phone. But sometime around midnight, the covers began to shift on their own, sliding off piece by piece. The air grew cold. She heard it again, soft, wet breathing, not behind her this time, beneath her, beneath the floorboards. The walls began to pulse, faintly, in rhythm with something unseen. When she turned toward the dresser, the mirror she'd smashed that morning was whole again, spotless, gleaming. Her reflection stared back, smiling with someone else's mouth. And faintly, from within the glass, she heard a voice, quiet, tired, almost tender. "Stay. It's easier when you stop fighting." Sarah screamed and lunged forward, striking the mirror with both hands. The glass cracked but didn't break. Her reflection bled where she didn't. Cracks spread like veins, glowing faintly in the dark. Then, silence. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the motel. She stood in room 124. The mirror loomed before her, unbroken. The walls smelled of damp and decay. Behind her, the bed creaked softly, and from the glass, two figures stared back. One trembling, one smiling, both breathing. The mirror had stopped fogging that morning. Sarah noticed it when she returned from breakfast, an uneasy relief, as though the room had exhaled for the first time in days. The condensation that used to bloom across the surface was gone, but instead of seeing herself clearly, she saw something too clear. The reflection was crisp, razor-edged, like it didn't belong to the dull hotel lighting. Her reflection's eyes didn't move with hers anymore. They were slightly offbeat, like a poorly dubbed film. She blinked. Her reflection followed, but a fraction too late. She stepped closer, pressing her fingers against the cold glass. No fog, no warmth. Only that sense of depth again, as if behind the silver surface was a room identical to hers, except it wasn't empty. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She had started leaving the bathroom light on. The steady hum of the vent, the faint flicker of the fluorescent bulb, it all gave her the illusion that she wasn't alone. She lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the slice of yellow light under the door. And then she saw it. A shadow moved across the line of light. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, the play of tired eyes. But then came the sound, slow, deliberate footsteps across the tiles. Not from outside, from inside the bathroom. "Hello?" she called softly, voice cracking. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Sarah sat up, the bed creaking beneath her. Is someone there? The pause stretched on for too long. Then tap, tap, tap. 3 sharp knocks against the mirror. She froze. The sound wasn't from the door. It came from the mirror itself, like someone's knuckles against the other side of the glass. Her breath hitched. She stood, trembling, and approached the bathroom. The knocking stopped. Only the hum of the vent remained. She turned the light off. The reflection didn't turn off with it. The room in the mirror stayed lit. She screamed, stumbling back. But the reflection of her body, the one standing in that lit room, didn't move. It just stared at her, its mouth slightly open, as if it were about to say something. The next morning, Sarah went to the front desk. There's something wrong with my room, she said. Her voice was hoarse. The mirror, it's not right. The clerk looked at her, expression flat. Not right how? It doesn't reflect correctly. I think it's broken or something. Could you send someone to replace it? The clerk hesitated, glancing toward the office behind him. Then he leaned forward slightly. You're in 124? Yes. He swallowed. Ma'am, that room's been closed for. Well, a long time. Are you sure? Sarah's face went pale. I'm staying there. I checked in 2 nights ago. You gave me the key. He blinked, confused, and turned to the system behind him. That's impossible. The system says 124 is vacant. Has been for months. Sarah stared at him. Then who checked me in? The clerk didn't answer. When she returned to her room, the key wouldn't work. The red light on the lock blinked each time she tried. She banged on the door. Open, please! A muffled voice came from inside. Stop knocking. It was her voice. Sarah staggered backward, dropping the key card. Who's there? Silence. The voice came again, closer this time, like someone standing just behind the door. You don't belong here anymore. She ran, down the hallway, through the stairwell, to the lobby. But the moment she pushed open the exit door, the hallway looped back, same wallpaper, same faded carpet, same dim bulbs. Room 124 was waiting for her again at the end of the corridor. Her heart pounded in her ears. She took a step backward, then another, but the corridor expanded, stretching endlessly, and every door number along the walls read 124. The air grew colder. The hum of the lights turned into a low moan. Sarah, a voice whispered. She turned. The reflection in the glass frame on the wall rippled like water. You shouldn't have looked too long. She stumbled into one of the rooms, it didn't matter which. They were all the same now, and slammed the door shut. The mirror inside flickered. Her reflection was smiling. It lifted its hand slowly, and she noticed its fingers were leaving faint streaks of blood across the glass. No, Sarah whispered. You're not me. The reflection tilted its head, mirroring her words a beat too late. You're not me. Then it pressed its palms to the surface. The glass bent inward. She screamed and ran toward the door, but it was locked. The walls pulsed, breathing. The mirror's surface began to bulge outward, a human shape forming beneath it like something trying to crawl through. Her reflection stepped out slowly, dripping from the frame like a newborn thing. It looked identical to her, except its eyes were hollow, black voids filled with faint whispers. Sarah fell to the floor. Please, I didn't mean to. The doppelganger crouched beside her, tilting its head. Then it smiled, a broken, uneven smile, and whispered, You did mean to look. You wanted to see what's behind. Its fingers touched her face. The skin was cold, sticky. I've been waiting. It breathed. Now, you can wait in there. Before she could move, the thing grabbed her by the throat and dragged her toward the mirror. The surface had become like liquid mercury, shimmering in waves. No, no, she screamed, kicking and clawing, but her reflection didn't stop. It pulled her into the glass, inch by inch, her body twisting as the world turned silver and dark. Then silence. When the room settled, There was only one figure left standing. Sarah looked around, disoriented, heart pounding. Everything looked the same. Bed, lamp, curtains. But the air was cold. She turned toward the mirror. Inside it, something pounded faintly. She saw a woman's face pressed against the other side of the glass, her mouth open in a silent scream. Sarah reached out, touching the surface gently. "I told you," she whispered, smiling faintly. "You don't belong here anymore." Him. Her reflection in the mirror mimicked the words perfectly in sync. No delay this time. But behind that reflection, deeper within the glass, dozens of other faces were watching. Their breath fogged the mirror once again, and as the condensation spread across the surface, the reflection smiled wider. The hotel had gone quiet. Not silent quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the building itself was holding its breath. Sarah, or whatever she had become, sat on the edge of the bed in room 124, staring at her own hands. The skin still looked human, but it didn't feel right. It was too cold, too smooth, as if she were only borrowing it. Every so often she could hear faint tapping beneath the floorboards. It wasn't the pipes, she knew that now. It was slower, heavier, rhythmic, like someone drumming from below. The mirror stood across the room, spotless again. Her reflection was perfect. Too perfect. It smiled when she smiled, breathed when she breathed. But behind it, in the dark shimmer of the glass, something moved. Something was below. The sound came again that night. Tap, tap, scrape. Sarah knelt on the carpet and pressed her ear to the floor. The noise was clearer now, a dragging sound, like someone pulling their fingernails across concrete. Then a voice, muffled but close. "Let me out." She jumped back. Her heart hammered. The floorboards shuddered beneath her feet. She could see the faintest outline of something bulging up from below a shape, pressing against the thin wood. "Who's there?" she whispered. The voice came again, wet and breathless. Her throat tightened. You're not real. You made me real." She stumbled back toward the bed, clutching the edge. The tapping grew faster. Then the bulge beneath the floor split open with a sharp crack. A pale hand emerged, coated in something black and glistening. The fingers twitched, reaching toward her ankle. Sarah screamed and backed away, slamming into the wall. The hand clawed upward, followed by an arm, a shoulder, something crawling out of the darkness beneath the boards. When its face appeared, she stopped breathing. It was her, or rather, what she used to be. The thing from beneath the floor looked like her reflection before the switch, pale, trembling, eyes wide with terror. Its lips moved, whispering in broken gasps. "Please, let me out. I can't breathe down there." Sarah shook her head violently. "You're not me. You can't be me." But as she spoke, she felt the cold air pulling at her own skin. The walls seemed to pulse, the floor bending inward like it was breathing. The mirror behind her trembled, the glass warping. The crawling figure reached a shaking hand toward her. "I don't belong there," it said, voice cracking. "You took my place." "No." "Yes." Its eyes flared white. "You look too deep, Sarah. You saw what you shouldn't. Now you're the reflection." The words hit like ice water. Sarah turned toward the mirror, desperate to prove it wrong, desperate to see herself as she was, but when she looked, the reflection wasn't her anymore. The figure in the mirror was the one crawling from the floor, gasping, terrified. And she, standing here, cold, empty, was the thing that belonged beneath. The mirror pulsed once, the surface rippling like water disturbed by a drop. The reflection of the room twisted, angles bending into impossible shapes. She stumbled backward, but her foot slipped straight into the crack in the floor. Her scream echoed through the hollow boards. Something beneath caught her ankle and pulled. "No, stop. Let me go," she cried, clawing at the carpet. Her nails tore against the rough weave, but it didn't help. The darkness below yawned open like a mouth, swallowing the light. The thing that looked like her old self, stood watching, expression unreadable. Its voice was almost tender. "It's okay," it whispered. "It's only fair." Sarah's body was halfway through the floor now. She could feel the cold swallowing her legs, her hips, her chest. Her scream became a wet rasp as something cold coiled around her throat from beneath. And then, in one sharp pull, she was gone. When she opened her eyes, everything was upside down. She was standing or hanging in a place that looked almost identical to room 124, except it wasn't real. The air shimmered like she was underwater. The ceiling was made of moving glass, and through it, she could see her room above. She could see herself. The other Sarah stood there, smoothing her hair in the mirror, humming softly. Her skin was warm, alive. The reflection smiled up at her, but she couldn't scream loud enough for it to hear. Her voice was swallowed by the hum of the darkness below. She looked down. Beneath her feet, hundreds of faces moved in the walls, faces she hadn't noticed before. Men, women, even children. All of them silent, all of them watching her. Their eyes gleamed faintly in the dark. Some had mouths sewn shut. Others whispered without sound. And somewhere in the distance, something enormous shifted. She ran, or tried to. The floor beneath her rippled like liquid glass, distorting her reflection with every step. The walls closed in, whispering names she didn't recognize. When she reached the mirror, her only hope, it was like looking up through a frozen lake. The other Sarah was sitting on the bed, laughing softly, talking to someone on the phone. "Yeah," she said. "The view here is perfect." Her laughter sounded like wind through broken glass. Sarah slammed her fists against the mirror from below. "Let me out, please, I'm still here." The other woman turned, as if she heard something faint. She looked at the mirror, brow furrowing slightly. For a moment, Sarah thought she'd done it, that she'd broken through. But then the woman smiled, leaned forward and whispered, "Shh, you'll wake them." Then she placed her palm on the glass. From beneath, Sarah did the same. For a heartbeat, warmth passed between them, familiar, human. Then the glass burned ice cold. The world inverted. When Sarah woke, the mirror was above her again. She was back in the room. The air was warm. The light flickered softly. She sat up, breathing hard, and looked around. Everything looked normal. The floor was fixed. The crack was gone. She almost believed it had been a nightmare, until she turned to the mirror and saw the faint handprint on the inside of the glass. Her breath caught. It was her handprint, the one she'd pressed from underneath. And when she leaned closer, she could see eyes staring back just behind her reflection. Dozens of them, watching, waiting. That night, she dreamed of the place below. She dreamed of the hands pressing against the glass, of the whispers rising like breath through the floor. When she awoke, the carpet beneath her bed was damp. A slow, dark stain was spreading outward. She touched it with her fingertips. It was cold, sticky. The same tapping began again beneath the floorboards. Tap, tap, tap. "Sarah," a voice whispered softer than before. "You'll visit us again soon." Her throat tightened. She pressed her hands against her ears. "No, no, please." But the voice came from inside her head now, from beneath her heartbeat. "You don't visit the beneath," it said. "You return to it." The next morning, the maid knocked on the door. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. The key turned easily in the lock. When she stepped inside, the room was cold. The bed was made. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and something metallic. The only thing out of place was the mirror. A single handprint marked its surface smudged, trailing down the glass. And from deep within it, a faint whisper seemed to echo. "Let me out." Him. The next tenant moved into room 124 on a Thursday afternoon. Her name was Clara Hayes, 29, marketing assistant, divorced, desperate for a quiet place that didn't smell like cigarettes and failure. The building manager smiled at her the way people smile when they know too much. He handed her the key and said the same thing he always said. Don't worry if you hear noises. Pipes in this place have a life of their own. Clara nodded, grateful for the discount. She didn't care about pipes. She just needed a bed, a roof, and maybe a night of dreamless sleep. When she opened the door to 124, the air felt still, preserved like something had been waiting. The room was clean, too clean. The floorboards gleamed, though faint stains traced beneath the carpet near the bed. A large mirror stood against the far wall, its surface veiled by a pale reflection of afternoon light. She thought it beautiful. In a way, it looked like it wanted to be noticed. That night, she dreamed of whispering. Not words exactly, just a pattern of breath, rising and falling like the sea. She dreamed she was standing in water up to her knees, staring at hundreds of faces drifting beneath the surface. They didn't move. They only watched. When she woke, her pillow was damp. She didn't remember crying. The next evening, Clara ordered takeout, drank half a bottle of cheap red wine, and sat cross-legged on the floor scrolling through her phone. The building around her was quiet except for the low hum of traffic outside. At some point, her reflection in the mirror caught her eye. She looked up and saw that it wasn't moving with her. Her heart paused. The reflection sat completely still, eyes half-lidded, head tilted slightly to the side. Its mouth hung open, as if listening. Clara blinked, rubbed her eyes. When she looked again, it was normal. She told herself it was fatigue. She'd been working too much. Her brain was playing tricks, but when she turned away, she thought she heard a faint exhale against the glass, a sound like breath. On the third night, she heard footsteps, not in the hall underneath her. Slow, dragging, almost thoughtful. Each step pressed upward through the wood, vibrating faintly beneath the soles of her feet. She sat up in bed, listening. The sound stopped. Then came another, and another. The floor trembled with a long, shuddering sigh. Clara swung her legs out of bed. Who's there? No answer. Only that same slow drag, moving toward the center of the room. She stepped back, her pulse quickening. Mr. Evans? She called. Is that you? Still nothing. Then the floor beneath the mirror shifted just a little, as if something inside the wall was pressing outward. A faint crack appeared along the baseboard. She stared at it for a long time before forcing herself back into bed. Sleep didn't come, only the whispering. By morning, she was exhausted. Coffee tasted like ash. She caught herself staring into the mirror every time she passed it, as though it might catch her off guard. Around noon, she realized something strange. Her reflection didn't match the lighting in the room. The sunlight streaming through the curtains hit her right shoulder. In the mirror, it hit the left. That's when she saw the shadow. A faint human silhouette standing just behind her reflected self. Thin, long, almost featureless. It moved closer every time she blinked. By the fifth blink, it was standing directly behind her reflection's shoulder. By the sixth, it was gone. She spun around. Nothing. Just her empty apartment, humming quietly. But when she turned back to the mirror, she froze. A single fingertip was pressing against the glass from inside. Clara dropped her coffee mug. It shattered at her feet, splattering her ankles with warmth. She didn't even feel it. Her reflection was smiling. Not a big smile, just a slow curling of the lips, patient and cruel. Something was moving behind the glass again. Not a person this time, more like a collection of them. Arms, torsos, heads pressed together, swimming just below the surface. And in the middle of them, she saw a woman's face, pale, hollow-eyed, mouth sewn shut. The woman raised one trembling finger to her lips. Then, without sound, she whispered, "Shh." That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the city lights, trying not to look at the mirror. At some point near midnight, the power went out. The room plunged into darkness. For a few seconds, all she could hear was her heartbeat. Then faintly, the sound of breathing. Not hers, The mirror was glowing faintly now, lit from within by something pale and fluid. Shadows moved behind it like shapes under a lake. Clara stood, trembling. "Please," she whispered, "just stop." The glass rippled. A hand pressed out, then another. The surface cracked not outward, but inward, as though the room were being pulled through the mirror, instead of the other way around. A voice came through, soft, childlike. "Are you hungry?" The sound grew louder, dozens of whispers overlapping. Some laughed, some wept, some called her name, though she'd never told anyone here what it was. The mirror swelled, its surface bulging like a lung filled with breath. Then it burst open, not with light, but with darkness. Something spilled out. Clara screamed as cold air slammed into her, knocking her backward. The mirror bent outward, its edges warping like wet paper. Hands poured through. Pale hands, gray hands, all grasping, searching. They crawled across the floor, pulling themselves forward. Their nails scraped against the wood like knives. Behind them came faces, hundreds of faces. Some she recognized. The woman with the sewn lips, the old man from the lobby, a girl in a hospital gown, a child clutching a rattle made of bone. They filled the room, spilling through the walls, crawling toward her in silence. Clara backed against the door, sobbing. "What do you want from me?" A single voice answered, calm and near. "To be remembered." The faces closed in. The air turned heavy. The scent of wet wood and decay filled her lungs. The woman with the stitched mouth knelt in front of her, raising trembling fingers to her throat. "Feast," whispered a dozen voices together. "Feast of the forgotten." The hands touched her skin cold, searching. She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed. Her mouth filled with the taste of dirt and copper. The walls seemed to expand, and suddenly she was falling backward through the mirror, through the floor, into that same glassy void Sarah had fallen into before. The faces surrounded her, pressing closer, whispering memories she'd never lived. A man's last breath in a bathtub, a woman's scream in a hallway, a child whispering for help beneath the bed. They poured into her, each memory a bite, each whisper a wound. When it ended, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. Above, the apartment went still again. When the police arrived 3 days later, they found the door locked from the inside. No sign of struggle. Only the mirror had changed. It was cracked in a perfect circle, like something had pressed outward and stopped just before escaping. The carpet was damp near the bed, dark and sticky, and in the center of the mirror, faintly visible when the light hit just right, was the outline of a woman's face. Eyes open, mouth frozen, mid-scream. Weeks later, the building manager relisted the apartment. He told the new couple that the strange smell was gone, that the pipes had finally been fixed. They smiled, took the keys, thanked him for the discount. When they entered, sunlight fell across the mirror, lighting it like a shrine. For a moment, the husband thought he saw movement within it, something pale and distant, smiling faintly. He blinked. It was gone. He laughed at himself, set down his bags, and kissed his wife on the cheek. "Home," he said. Behind them, the mirror breathed out a thin, invisible sigh, like someone had been holding their breath for too long. In the darkness beneath room 124, the feast began again. One breath, one memory, one name at a time. And somewhere within the endless whispering, a single voice rose above the rest. Soft, steady, waiting. "Welcome home." The 18-story fall. When I first opened my eyes, I thought I had survived. The world was white, too white. A haze that stung my eyes, bleached every edge of the room into a blur. I could smell disinfectant, sharp and sterile, cutting through the back of my throat. Machines murmured in a slow, mechanical rhythm beside me, a lullaby of beeping pulses that marked someone's fragile life. Mine, I assumed. I tried to lift my arm, but it didn't move. My body felt distant, heavy, as if I were lying beneath a sheet of glass. I turned my head instead, slowly, and the effort alone made my vision swim. The window to my right was closed, sealed with tape. The light outside wasn't the kind of sunlight I remembered it. Had no warmth, no texture. It just existed, pale and indifferent. Then I noticed the figure in the chair beside me. A nurse, maybe, or an angel of pity. She sat with her head bowed, hands folded in her lap, her lips moving in silence. For a long time she didn't look up, and I thought maybe she was praying. But when she did, I saw her eyes were empty. No, not empty, hollow. Like there was still water inside them, but no reflection. "Evan," she said softly, "you should not be awake yet." Her voice made me flinch. I didn't remember telling her my name. Where? My throat cracked on the first word, dry as sand. "Where am I?" "Still between," she said. Then she smiled, a small, understanding smile that looked almost human, and stood, walking toward the door. The soles of her shoes made no sound on the tile. When she reached the handle, she turned back once, her hair shifting slightly as if caught by a breeze that wasn't there. "You fell," she whispered. 18 stories. I should have died. The memories came in fragments, each one sharp enough to draw blood. A balcony, railing, slick with rain. The taste of vodka on my tongue. The red tail lights of cars below, glowing like embers through the mist. And her voice, "Godie." I'd thought it was a joke at first. A cruel one, sure, but still a joke. But she'd said it again, flat, deliberate. "Go die, Evan. Just stop pretending you'd ever change." And so I'd climbed the rail. The rest was motion, air, speed, and then nothing. But now here I was, alive, breathing. Maybe God had made a clerical error. I wanted to laugh, but my chest hurt too much. So I closed my eyes and listened to the machines. Each beep, each inhale of the respirator counted off a rhythm of survival until the rhythm faltered. The beeping grew irregular, staggered, as if something or someone was tampering with it. I opened my eyes again. The nurse was gone. In her place, standing at the foot of the bed, was an old woman. Her clothes were rags layered over rags, streaked with grime and rainwater. Her hair hung in wet ropes around a narrow, bony face. She smelled faintly of rust and alleyways. She was watching me. "Who?" I tried, but she cut me off with a sound that wasn't quite a word, more like a breath forced through clenched teeth. "Huh," she hissed. It was almost a scream, but not loud. It crawled under my skin instead of into my ears. "Ah," she said again, louder this time, and stepped forward. Her feet made no noise on the tile either. I wanted to call for help, to press the button by my bed, but my hands wouldn't move. She reached the edge of the mattress and leaned over me. Her eyes were wild gray, filmed with something milky and filled with accusation. Her breath hit my face. Foul, cold, earthy. "Get away," I croaked. She shook her head. Her fingers bent, trembling closed around my wrist. The sensation was shockingly solid, not the touch of a ghost, the grip of someone who shouldn't exist. "Ah!" she screamed again, inches from my face. The heart monitor spasmed, lines spiked, then flattened, then spiked again. I tried to pull back, but she held me down with surprising strength. And then she began to cry. Not sobbing, something quieter, more guttural. The kind of sound an animal makes when it's been hurt for so long it no longer remembers why. Her tears hit my arm, cold as rain. "Please," I whispered. "I don't know you." Her mouth opened, trembling. For a second, I thought she was going to speak, but the only word that escaped was another "ah," this time dragged out, soft and strangled. Then she released me and staggered backward, vanishing into the corner of the room. When the lights flickered back on, she was gone. Only the faint imprint of her wet footprints remained on the floor leading to the window. The nurses came later, talking softly as they adjusted wires and checked the monitors. I didn't ask about the old woman. I just listened. "Poor kid," one of them said. "Still unconscious." "He's lucky," the other replied. "If that old woman hadn't been down there, he'd be a smear on the pavement." My blood froze. "Old woman?" "Yeah," the nurse continued. "Homeless, I think. She was standing under the building when he jumped. Broke his fall a bit, saved his life. Though, she hesitated. Though she didn't make it, neither did her cats. She kept 9 of them, poor things. They found them all crushed. I wanted to scream, but the words stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. They moved on, still talking, their voices fading into the corridor. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to breathe. The air in the room felt thick, gelatinous. My lungs refused to fill, and then I realized why. Because the old woman was back. She stood beside the bed again, her clothes darker now, dripping. Her hair hung across her face, plastered to her skin. She didn't move or make a sound, but her presence filled the room. I could smell rainwater, mold, and something else. Something metallic, like pennies soaked in vinegar. Her hands were clenched into fists. Her fingers trembled. I didn't need her to speak. I already knew. She was the one who had saved me. The one who had died so I could live. And now she was here to collect what was owed. Please, I said. I didn't mean. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing, her lips parted, revealing gums black with rot. Then, for the first time, she spoke in something that wasn't just a scream. You took 10. Her voice was the sound of gravel sliding down a drain. 10 lives, she said again. 1 man, 9 souls. I didn't know, I whispered. I didn't know they were there. Her expression didn't change. You were told to die. You refused, so I did it for you. I couldn't look away from her eyes. They weren't accusing anymore. They were pleading. I want them back, she said. All 10. And then she reached for me again. Her fingers slipped through my chest, not cutting, not tearing, just passing through. The machines began to beep wildly. My vision darkened. Wait, I gasped. You don't understand. I didn't want to live. She leaned closer. That's what we all say, she whispered. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing. The bed was in front of me, but I wasn't in it. My body lay motionless, tubes dangling, skin pale. The heart monitor was a flat line. The nurses were shouting, moving fast. One of them grabbed paddles, pressed them to my chest. My body jumped once, twice. No response. The old woman stood at the foot of the bed, watching. She looked at me. Not the corpse. Me. Her face softened, almost with pity. You can go back, she said, but not for free. Man, I'll do anything, I whispered. She smiled, and it was the first true smile I'd seen since I woke. I know. She reached out, took my hand. Her touch burned, but I didn't pull away. You'll live, she said. But you'll remember. What will I remember? Her eyes flickered, and behind her, for just a moment, I saw them 9 shapes moving in the shadows, tails curling, eyes gleaming faintly in the dark. The cats. They watched me silently, their bodies translucent, their mouths opening in perfect unison. A single sound rose from them, high and thin, a wail that pierced through every layer of my mind. And then she let go. I fell backward, into myself. The first thing I felt was pain. Real, human pain, every bone, every nerve screaming in chorus. My lungs filled, the machine started again. The nurses cried out in relief. He's back, someone said. He's breathing. I didn't tell them what else I'd brought back with me. Because even as I gasped for air, even as I blinked against the harsh light, I could feel them. Altain, the old woman, the 9 cats. They lived in the silence between my heartbeats, in the reflection of the window beside my bed, waiting. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw them fall again, one by one, into the dark. When I opened my eyes again, the world was colorless. The ceiling above me was white, yet not entirely white. It had the faint yellow of neglect, the gray of time. There was no sound except for the soft, rhythmic beep, beep, beep that threaded itself through my chest like a reminder. You are not supposed to be alive. I tried to move. My hands didn't obey. My legs felt foreign. The air smelled of disinfectant and plastic, thick enough to choke on. A curtain hung beside my bed, half drawn. and beyond it I could hear distant whispers. Nurses. Maybe. Then, through the reflection in the metal stand, holding my IV drip, I saw it. My own body. Or what was left of it. I was standing, or rather floating, a few inches above the tiled floor, watching the pale figure lying under the hospital blanket. My face was bruised, the lips split, a bandage wrapped around my skull. Tubes snaked into my mouth and arms. The skin looked waxy, dead. For a moment, I thought it was someone else. But then I recognized the mole near the ear. The faint scar on the chin, the one I'd gotten from a bicycle fall when I was 9. It was me. The realization arrived like a shiver that didn't know where to go. I turned to the window. The city outside was dim, evening melting into rain. My breath fogged the glass, but the fog didn't fade, it lingered, like something from the other side pressing its face against mine. That was when I saw her, a woman, small and hunched, standing by the hallway outside my room. Her hair was a tangle of gray threads, soaked and matted. She wore what looked like an oversized coat, stained and frayed, and her feet were bare. She wasn't moving, just watching me through the narrow glass slit on the door. Our eyes met. The shock wasn't in her face, but in mine, because her eyes weren't human anymore. They were a washed-out yellow, fogged with cataracts, and yet aware. She blinked once, slowly, and I swear I heard something not in my ears, but inside my head. "You shouldn't be here." I turned to look at the hospital bed again. My body twitched. A nurse entered the room. She walked right through me and adjusted the monitor. She didn't seem to notice the old woman outside, or me standing there. "Still stable," she murmured, checking the 4 bag. "Lucky boy. From 18 floors. Still breathing. 18 floors." It came back in fragments. The roof. The scream that wasn't mine. The wind rushing up like a mouth. Then a shadow below. A voice crying out. Bones meeting concrete. And now, this. When I left the room, the hallway felt endless, a white tunnel with no exit, lights flickering in a pattern that made no sense. Every step I took sounded both near and far, like walking on glass underwater. I searched for the old woman, but she wasn't there anymore. Only a faint, sour smell remained, a mixture of damp earth and old iron. I wandered past rooms filled with people sleeping, machines whispering to themselves. Some doors were locked, others open. I passed one where a man lay under a sheet, his chest still. The monitor beside him was silent. And yet, as I looked closer, I saw something impossible. A second shape, hovering above his body, transparent like mine. The shape turned to me, its face flickering like smoke. "He's gone," the shape said, the voice neither male nor female. "We wait. That's what we do." "Wait for what?" "For the ones who don't belong." Aye, the shape smiled, if it could be called that, and dissolved into the air, leaving only a ripple like heat. I didn't understand what it meant then, but I would soon. It was hours later, or what felt like hours, when I saw her again. She was sitting in a chair near the exit, her bony fingers folded in her lap. Her coat was the same, torn and filthy, and her head tilted toward the floor as though in prayer. I approached her carefully. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice came out hollow, as though spoken through a pipe. No answer. Her lips moved, but the sound that came wasn't a word, it was a rasp, a drawn-out moan that made my skin crawl, even though I wasn't sure I still had skin. I crouched down beside her. You can see me, right?" This time she looked up, and I wish she hadn't. The whites of her eyes were gone, just a cloudy gray film covering everything. Yet behind it, something looked out. Not human, not dead. Something stuck. "I saw you," she whispered. Her breath smelled of rain-soaked trash, of something buried and dug up again. "I saw you fall." I froze. She reached out a trembling hand. "You landed on me." I stared. "What?" Her fingers brushed my face cold, not with temperature, but with memory. And then I saw it. The street, my own body tumbling through air, slow and beautiful in its surrender. Below, a small figure in rags, looking up, her arms reaching. Then, impact. The sound wasn't of bones breaking. It was of everything stopping. "I tried to catch you," she said, her voice cracking. "But you took me with you." Her hands tightened on my shoulders. The nails dug in, though there was nothing to dig into. 9 little mouths, she hissed. Hungry. They waited for me, and now they wait still. Her face was close enough for me to see the reflection of myself in her eyes, a pale ghost framed by fluorescent light. I stumbled back. "I didn't mean—" "You meant to die." Her tone was not accusing, just factual. "But you didn't die," she continued. "You stole it. You stole what was meant to be mine." I could feel the hallway close around us, walls breathing faintly. The lights buzzed louder. "I didn't know," I said. "I didn't know anyone." "Doesn't matter," she whispered. "The ground remembers." And then she was gone. Just gone like mist, drawn into a vacuum. Only her smell remained, stronger now, rot, metal, and rain. I tried to find someone, anyone but every nurse. Every doctor I passed moved like a figure in a dream. None of them saw me. The air thickened. The walls seemed to bend inward. I ran. At the end of the corridor, I found a window overlooking the parking lot below. Rain streaked the glass. Far down, near the emergency entrance, was a cluster of flowers and candles. A makeshift memorial. I leaned closer. A photograph sat among them, wrinkled and water-stained. It was her, the old woman. And beside her feet, 9 cats, black, white, gray, curled in her lap, frozen in some tender moment of life. The caption under the photo read, "Mrs. Harlow, beloved by the strays, died saving a boy she never knew." My breath stopped. I turned around. She was standing behind me. Her coat dripped water onto the floor that left no puddle. Her eyes gleamed faintly in the sterile light. "Do you see now?" she asked. I couldn't speak. "I didn't want to save you," she said quietly, "but I couldn't help it. You fell, and I reached out. Now we're both trapped." "Trapped?" She nodded. "The living can't see us. The dead won't take us. Because your life, your fall tangled with mine. We belong to neither." She smiled, but it was sad, brittle. "You'll feel it soon. The hunger, the noise inside your head." "What noise?" The question barely left my lips before I heard it faint mewling, distant but insistent. Then more, multiplying, crawling through the walls, the vents, the floor. 9 small voices, crying, clawing, calling. I clutched my ears, but it didn't stop. "They're looking for me," she said. "But you brought me here, so they'll find you instead." The lights flickered, and for a second the entire hospital turned dark. When they blinked back on, she was gone. Only the faint trail of muddy footprints remained, leading toward my hospital bed. And from the bed, through the half-open curtain, came the sound of purring, soft, gentle, growing louder. I stepped closer, unable to stop myself. Under the sheets, something moved, small lumps writhing, the blanket rising and falling like breathing. The monitor spiked, then flatlined, and for the first time, my body opened its eyes. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Not the rhythmic, sterile beep of the machines anymore, but the muffled drag of something heavier. A breath that didn't belong to me. The air in the ICU felt wrong, swollen, as if too many lungs were drawing from the same stale oxygen. I wasn't floating this time. I was back inside. My body felt like a house filled with strangers. Every twitch, every pulse, every tremor of blood carried weight that wasn't mine. My chest rose, but the breath came with a faint hiss, as if someone else was exhaling through me. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. The ceiling was still white, but it shimmered faintly, like the surface of deep water. The monitor beside me showed an erratic heartbeat, spikes, valleys, bursts of static, and every flicker made the shadows ripple along the walls. He blinked. There, the edge of my vision, I saw movement, something small, dark, and low to the ground, crawling. I turned my head, slowly, muscles creaking in protest. It was a cat, or what used to be one. Its fur was soaked, patches missing, eyes clouded. It limped toward the bed and stopped by my hand, its ribs rising and falling like bellows. When I reached out, it didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned in, pressing its cold nose to my palm. I could feel its heartbeat faint, quick, wrong. 9 lives, I thought. 9 mouths. My stomach turned. There was a whisper, so close I thought it came from my own throat. They found you. By morning, the nurses said I'd miraculously stabilized. My breathing was strong. My eyes were responsive. They said I was lucky. I wanted to tell them luck had nothing to do with it. I watched their lips move, their faces blurred by the haze of the morphine drip. Everything sounded like it came from behind a wall of glass. You gave us quite a scare, one nurse said. They said you bounced right off that awning. If not for the woman, her voice caught. She didn't finish. I closed my eyes. Every time I did, I saw her, the old woman, standing beneath me in the rain, hands outstretched, her eyes open, mouth forming a scream that never ended. The moment of impact replayed endlessly, and each time I saw something new. The glint of a cat's collar, the scattering of shapes around her feet. She didn't die alone. I made sure of that. Days passed, or I thought they did. The hospital room was both a prison and a stage. The curtains never opened fully, and the fluorescent lights buzzed like flies. The nurses came and went, their smiles mechanical, but the shadows didn't leave. They grew darker at the corners of the room under the bed, behind the IV stand, along the curve of the sink. At night, they moved. Once, I saw something press up from under the sheets at my feet. The weight was small, but deliberate. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The outline rose, the shape of a head, then 2 small paws kneading the blanket, then a second, a third, until the entire bed seemed to breathe under their invisible weight. The air smelled faintly of rain-soaked fur. On the 4th night, I woke up gasping. The machines were silent. The power had gone out. Only the emergency red light flickered faintly over the doorway. And there, beside my bed, sat the old woman. Her coat was gone now. Her skin glistened like wet paper, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She watched me with those cataract eyes, unblinking. "You came back," she said softly. My mouth was dry. I could barely whisper. "Why me? You took my fall." Her voice was calm, almost kind. "And I took your death. We traded places, but not completely. The balance isn't right." I tried to move, but my limbs were heavy, like something was holding them down. "You were supposed to go," she continued, "but you didn't. The ground kept me. And now," she tilted her head, "now you must carry the rest." I looked down. Under the thin hospital blanket, the shapes were back. 9 small lumps, moving, breathing. I could feel the pressure of tiny paws, the rhythmic thump of 9 tiny hearts pressed against my ribs. "They miss me," she whispered. But they found another warmth to cling to. Her smile was small and strange, neither cruel nor gentle. "Don't worry, they'll keep you company, forever." The days that followed blurred. Doctors came, checked charts, whispered to each other. They called me delirious. They said it was trauma, survivor's guilt, brain swelling, but they didn't see what I saw. When they left, the scratches appeared faint red lines across my forearms, like the trails of claws. The bandages never stayed clean. The nurses blamed me for picking at them. At night, I heard them purring again, the sound threading through my bones, soft but constant. Sometimes, when I drifted near sleep, I felt something licking the side of my face, and behind that, the old woman's breath, warm, wet, almost human. The hospital discharged me 2 weeks later. They said I was lucky to be walking, lucky to be alive. I nodded, smiled, played the part, but the world outside didn't look the same anymore. Every reflection in glass, in puddles, in the sheen of passing cars had something behind it. At night, I slept with the lights on. Didn't help. Sometimes, I'd wake up with paw prints on the sheets, small and wet leading up to my chest. Sometimes I'd find cat hair on my tongue. The nightmares came next. In them, I stood at the edge of the roof again, rain pouring down. Below me, the old woman waited. But this time, she didn't reach out. She stepped aside, and instead of falling toward her, I fell into her. Her body opened like a mouth. When I woke, my ribs hurt like something had clawed from the inside out. Weeks later, I tried to visit the memorial. The flowers were gone. The candles burned out. Only the photo remained, the one of her surrounded by the cats. Someone had written on it with black ink, "10 sous, 1 det." That night, I heard her voice again. "You carry them now," she said, whispering through the vents, the windows, the drain pipes. "Feed them, keep them warm. They get cold easily." I didn't want to believe it. But when I turned on the bathroom light, I saw the mirror fog over, though I hadn't showered. And in that fog, 9 faint paw prints appeared, one by one, climbing up the glass toward the reflection of my face. At the top, where my reflection's eyes should have been, 2 milky yellow circles looked back. By the 3rd month, I stopped pretending I was okay. I didn't leave my apartment. I unplugged the fridge because the hum sounded like breathing. I threw away my mirrors. Didn't matter, every reflective surface turned glossy when I looked too long. They followed me everywhere. At night, I'd wake to feel the mattress dip beside me. Sometimes it was one of them. Sometimes all of them. A dozen small bodies curling against my skin, kneading, purring, pressing their warmth into me. Once, I felt a hand, hers, stroking my hair. "You'll get used to it," she said. "The living always do." The final time I saw her was on a rainy evening in late November. The power had gone out again. The world outside my window was dark except for the city lights bleeding through the fog. When I turned around, she was sitting on the edge of my bed, the cats arrayed around her like a circle of shadows. She leaned closer, her eyes glowing faintly. "Do you feel it now?" she asked. I nodded. I didn't know what else to do. "The weight?" she whispered. I nodded again. "It's theirs," she said. "And mine. And now, yours." Her smile widened, stretching beyond what a face should do. "But don't worry. It won't last forever." "Why not?" I asked. She leaned closer, lips nearly brushing my ear. "Because someday," she said, "someone will fall for you." And then she was gone, not like mist, not like air, but as if she had moved inside me. I stood in silence. The air felt heavier than ever. From the darkness under the bed, the sound began again, faint mews, claws against wood, the sigh of old fur against skin. I looked down. 9 small shapes were crawling out, one by one. But this time, they weren't cats. They were hands. Small, gray, trembling hands. And as they climbed my legs, I realized what the weight of the living truly meant. It wasn't the burden of survival. It was the price of being spared. I didn't realize how cold the hospital morgue could be until I woke up inside it. The air was stale, heavy with the metallic scent of blood and disinfectant. My breath, if it could still be called, that hung like mist in the pale fluorescence. There were no sounds now. No beeping monitors, no nurses shuffling by. Only the quiet hum of the refrigeration unit, keeping the dead preserved. I sat up slowly on the steel table. My body, or rather the memory of it, felt heavier than ever. My reflection glimmered faintly on the metal surface, pale, fractured, like a ghost seen through fog. For the first time, I saw the bruises from the fall. Dark purple blooms spreading down my arms. My ribs caved slightly on one side, and then I noticed something worse. There were 10 drawers in the morgue. 10 narrow compartments stacked against the far wall, each one labeled with a simple tag. On the first 9 drawers, someone had scrawled in black marker, "Unidentified, street corpse." The 10th drawer had my name, Evan Wynn. I stumbled toward it, my legs barely cooperating. The air around me buzzed faintly, as if vibrating with invisible insects. My name tag seemed to shimmer, then peel, then pulse. A faint sound began inside my skull, like the scraping of claws against metal. The first drawer moved. It slid open halfway. creaking like a door to something long forgotten. Inside lay a cat. Its fur was matted, gray with soot. Its body was contorted, broken, but the head was turned toward me. The eyes were open, wide, wet. It blinked. Then another drawer slid open, and another. One by one, the drawers creaked out, each revealing another broken cat. 9 of them in total. Each pair of eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. And behind them, a shadow moved. A figure hunched low, trembling, whispering. 10 lives, she croaked. Her voice wasn't human anymore. It came from everywhere at once, from the corners of the room, from under the metal tables, from within the walls. 10 lives, and 1 debt unpaid. The old woman crawled from the dark. Her bones cracked with each movement, her skin a map of scars and soot. She was wearing the same filthy coat, the one she died in. Her hair hung in thin gray ropes, soaked in something darker than water. "Why won't you let me go?" I whispered. She looked up. Her eyes burned like cigarette embers. "You don't understand," she said. "You fell to die. I fell to save. And now the world is out of balance." I backed away, bumping into the cold table. "You saved me. Why do you hate me for it?" "Because," she hissed, "you made me need to die." Her face twitched, as if it were struggling to stay whole. "I was meant to fade quietly, boy. But you tore the thread. You took what wasn't yours. 10 lives for 1 wasted one." I shook my head violently. "I didn't mean to." She raised her hand. The morgue flickered, and suddenly, I was falling again. Wind screamed past my ears, the city below a blur of light and metal. But this time I wasn't alone. I fell beside her, her wrinkled hand still clutching mine. Her eyes filled not with hate, but with infinite sorrow. 9 shadows followed us down the cats, their bodies stretched into streaks of light, spiraling through the air like ribbons of smoke. When we hit the ground, there was no sound, no pain, only stillness. I opened my eyes and found myself in the alley behind the hospital. The same cracked pavement, the same rusty dumpster. Only now there were no ambulances, no flashing lights, just the faint glow of dawn. The old woman was sitting across from me, cross-legged, the cat circling her ankles. She was smiling. "You fell far enough to see it, didn't you?" she said softly. "See what?" "The thread that connects the living to the forgotten." She pointed a bony finger at me. "You're standing on it now." I looked down. Beneath my feet was a shimmer of red, like a vein, pulsing faintly beneath the world's surface. "The 10th life is mine," she whispered, "but it needs a vessel." Before I could react, the cats began to wail. Not meow screams, human screams, each voice familiar, echoing the last words I'd heard before I jumped. "Go die." The words tore through me like broken glass. The red thread flared. The cats dissolved into dust. The old woman's face began to peel away, layer by layer, revealing something skeletal underneath. And then, I understood. The 10th life wasn't hers. It was mine. She wasn't taking it. She was returning it, but not as a gift, as a curse. When I woke again, I was back in the hospital bed. Machines beeping, a nurse gasping as she saw me open my eyes. "Oh my God, he's awake." Code Blue resolved, he's back. They surrounded me, doctors, lights, hands pressing against my chest. I couldn't speak. My throat burned, but I could feel it. Something else was breathing through me. Something cold, something old. When I blinked, I saw 10 reflections in the glass window. 9 small shadows crouched around the bed, and 1 human shape standing behind them, smiling with rotten teeth. Days passed. They said I was lucky, that I'd survived the fall by some miracle. They didn't see the shadows that followed me in the corners of the room. They didn't hear the faint scratching beneath the floor. At night I would wake to the feeling of fur against my skin, claws tracing the outline of my ribs, the hum of a voice whispering lullabies in a language I didn't understand. The doctors said I was healing, but every day I grew colder. Every time my heart monitor beeped, I swore I heard 10 beats instead of 1. One evening, As the sunset bled through the blinds, I saw her again, the old woman, sitting in the chair beside my bed. She looked peaceful this time. Her eyes were soft. "You should eat," she said quietly. "The living must feed." I stared at the tray beside me. There was a bowl of soup. Steam curled from it, but inside, instead of broth, I saw something shimmer. Tiny bones, fragments of fur, a single human tooth. I looked up, trembling. She smiled. "You took 10 lives, boy. Now they live in you. Don't let them starve." I screamed, throwing the tray to the ground, but when it shattered, there was nothing inside, just plain soup. The nurse rushed in, panicked, calling for help. But when she touched my shoulder, she froze. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, and then, slowly, she smiled. Her pupils shrank into slits. "Eat," she whispered, in the old woman's voice. They found her body the next morning in the supply closet. Her neck twisted unnaturally. No one could explain the bite marks on her arm, or why there were 10 faint paw prints leading away from her corpse. That night, I dreamt of the alley again. The same place where I fell, the same cracked pavement, but this time, there were no ambulances, no lights, just a single shadow standing in the middle of the street. The old woman. She held out her hand. In it, a single cat's skull gleaming like porcelain. "The 10th life is yours," she said, smiling. "Use it wisely." Then she turned and walked into the dark, and behind her, the city began to burn. When I awoke, the monitor was silent. My chest no longer rose and fell, but I was standing by the bed, looking down at myself. The nurses screamed when they saw me, though they couldn't have known why. I smiled at them because I knew I wasn't heaven anymore. I was the debt repaid, the 10th life, walking among the living. When I woke again, the hospital room was empty. No nurses, no monitors. No sound except the slow, irregular rhythm of my breathing, if it still counted as that. The air was thick with something metallic and damp. The curtains fluttered slightly, though the windows were closed. I sat up, expecting to feel the IV in my arm, but the needle was gone. In its place was a small scar, circular and red, pulsing faintly as if something alive moved beneath the skin. I looked around. The walls had changed. The sterile white panels were peeling away, revealing layers beneath old wallpaper, then cracked plaster, and beneath that, faint red lines, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Like vines, the whole hospital was breathing. There was a sound in the hallway, not footsteps, something dragging. Wet, uneven. I got out of bed and followed. The fluorescent lights flickered above, some blinking like tired eyes. The corridor stretched far longer than I remembered. The smell of antiseptic was stronger now, mingled with something rotten like spoiled meat and damp fur. When I reached the nurse's station, the chairs were overturned, papers scattered across the floor. A coffee cup lay on its side. The liquid inside thickened to black, and then I saw them. 9 small figures crouched along the hall, shapes with twisted spines and twitching tails. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the pale light like shards of glass. They weren't cats anymore. They were something between what they had been and what they had become. Skeletal, hairless, breathing with lungs that didn't belong to them. Their bodies shuddered, bones grinding softly. They turned toward me, in unison, and behind them she stood, the old woman. Her face was smooth now, her body younger, her back no longer hunched. But her eyes, those same eyes, burned with the same knowing hunger. "Evan," she said gently. "It's time." I took a step back. "For what?" "For the feast." She began to walk toward me, the floor beneath her feet darkening with each step. "Do you know what happens when the living eat what the dead leave behind?" She whispered. "They remember. Every sin, every name, every wound. That is how balance is restored." "I don't want this," I said. She smiled, showing too many teeth. "It doesn't matter what you want. You were chosen when you lived, and sealed when you fell." Her hands rose, trembling. "Now, You must feed the forgotten. The hospital began to twist. The walls stretched upward, and the floor dissolved beneath my feet, revealing the city below an endless sprawl of lights and bodies, pulsing like a single organism. Each building beat like a heart. Each street exhaled smoke, and through it all, I could see them, the forgotten, the people no one had mourned, the dead without graves, the bodies without names. They moved beneath the surface of the city, countless and restless, and they were all looking up at me. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. Please, stop. But she didn't. She came closer, her voice lowering to a whisper. You think you lived because you were lucky? You lived because they allowed you to. They lent you the breath you wasted. Her hand pressed against my chest. I felt something cold slide beneath my ribs, and then I saw it my heart, blackened, shriveled, beating weakly inside her palm. This belongs to them now, she said. She crushed it. The world shattered. I was no longer in the hospital. I was standing in the middle of a vast, circular chamber. The floor was made of cracked marble, streaked with dried blood. The walls were covered in murals, paintings of people feasting on shadows, tearing into invisible flesh. A long table stretched from one end of the hall to the other, and its center sat 10 chairs. 9 were octuped. The 10th was waiting. Each of the 9 figures looked human at first glance, but their movements betrayed them jerky, unnatural, limbs bending wrong. Their faces were hidden behind porcelain masks, painted with faint smiles. One mask had the faint outline of whiskers. Another had cat-like slits for eyes. They were the 9 lives I had taken. They turned toward me. Sit, they whispered in one voice. I took the 10th seat. I didn't want to, but my body moved on its own. Plates appeared before us, filled with raw meat, pale and quivering, glistening under unseen light. The smell made me gag. The old woman, now standing at the head of the table, raised a silver chalice. To the forgotten, she said softly. To the 10th life. They began to eat, tearing at the meat with bare hands, chewing slowly, their movements synchronized like a ritual. When it was my turn, I hesitated. She leaned close, whispering against my ear. You must eat to remember. So I did. The taste was wrong. Not blood, not flesh. It tasted like memories. I saw flashes my fall from the balcony, the old woman's scream, the cats beneath her feet scattering, the impact, the silence afterward, then other memories that weren't mine, sleeping under bridges, feeding scraps to 9 hungry mouths, coughing blood into rags, whispering names to the dark so the world wouldn't forget them. I saw her life, all of it, and I saw what I'd taken. When I looked down again, the meat was gone. My hands were slick with blood. My plate was empty. The others had vanished. Only the old woman remained. You understand now, she said. This is what it means to carry the forgotten. What happens to me? I asked, my voice shaking. She smiled sadly. You become one of them. She placed the chalice in front of me. Inside it, something shimmered red, glowing faintly. Drink, she said, and I hesitated. What if I don't? Her smile faded. Then you'll fall again. But this time, there won't be anyone to catch you. I lifted the chalice. The liquid was thick and hot, like molten iron. When it touched my tongue, I tasted every death I'd ever ignored, every soul that had slipped quietly into the dark while I was too busy pretending to live. I drank it all. The chamber began to fade, the walls dissolving into mist. The last thing I saw was her face, peaceful, almost kind, and then she was gone. I woke at sunrise on the hospital rooftop. The city below glimmered gold. I could feel the wind against my face, cold and alive. My body felt lighter, though I knew it wasn't really mine anymore. I looked down from the edge. 18 stories below, people moved like shadows. Cars glided along the street. Life went on, indifferent. But I could hear them now, the whispers beneath the city, the murmurs of those who had been forgotten. They were calling my name. I stepped closer to the ledge, and then I saw it. 10 faint figures standing in the reflection of the rooftop door. The 9 cats, and her watching silently. Not angry. Not vengeful. Just waiting. The wind carried her voice to me. Every life borrowed must one day be returned. I smiled faintly. For the first time, I understood. The fall was never punishment. It was an invitation, a way back to where I belonged. When they found my body, they said I had jumped again. But the strange thing was this. No one heard me fall. There was no sound, no blood, no impact, only a faint trail of red fur scattered across the rooftop. And when they tried to check the security footage, the cameras showed something else entirely. 9 cats sitting in a circle, and one human shape among them, smiling, the lake's endless eye. Cassandra wasn't supposed to be in the library that late. The storm had rolled in earlier than forecasted, a slow and sullen wave of black clouds that swallowed the horizon before sunset. And by the time she realized how dark it had become outside, the rain had already begun to hammer against the glass, like handfuls of pebbles. The overhead lights flickered once, dimmed, then held steady in that soft yellow pallor that makes everything look older than it really is. She had been reading about neural patterning for her psych seminar, underlining something about false visual memories, when she heard the faint crack of thunder somewhere far over the hills and, without really knowing why, looked up. Through the tall library windows, the night was a shifting mirror of black water and moving light. Beyond the trees that bordered the campus, she could just make out the lake, the one everyone called Hollow's Mirror. It wasn't a name the school used officially, of course, but every freshman heard the story eventually. A man had drowned there years ago, or maybe a woman, depending on who told it. Sometimes it was a professor, sometimes a student. What stayed the same was the part that made everyone lower their voices. The lake had a single, glassy patch in the center that never rippled, no matter the wind or rain. They said if you stared too long into it, it would blink back. Cassandra didn't believe in that kind of thing. She believed in neurons, in perception errors, in the small electrical storms of the mind that created ghosts from static. But that night, when lightning cracked open the clouds and flooded the world with silver, her eyes caught something she couldn't immediately explain. A shape, falling. It dropped straight down from the line of the old dormitory roof on the far side of the lake, a dark figure tumbling without a sound until it hit the water in a brief explosion of foam and light. The rain swallowed the ripples quickly, as though the lake itself had reached up to take it in. Cassandra froze, her pen still hovering above the underlined words. For a moment, she thought it must have been debris, a branch, something torn loose by the wind, but then another flash of lightning seared through the clouds and illuminated the lakeshore. A girl stood there. She was in a white dress, soaked and clinging, her hair plastered against her skull like ink poured over porcelain. Her face was turned upward toward the library, though Cassandra couldn't see her features clearly through the rain. But she was sure of one thing. The girl wasn't moving. Not even a tremor. Not even to wipe the rain from her face. She stood like a carved thing, watching. Cassandra's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Her rational mind, the part that always explained things away, whispered something about pareidolia, about the tricks of light and perspective. But another, quieter voice, one that lived in the bones rather than the brain, told her to look away. She didn't. She leaned closer to the window. The next bolt of lightning struck closer this time, close enough to make the glass vibrate. For an instant, the world froze in that blinding brilliance, and Cassandra saw the girl's face. Her skin was paper white, not the pale of a person in the rain, but the opaque, glimmering white of something preserved under ice. Her eyes were 2 dark hollows that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it, and from beneath them, thin red lines ran down her cheeks, not thick like blood, but fine as threads, trembling as though carried by the rain. And she was looking straight at Cassandra. The sound that came out of Cassandra's throat wasn't quite a scream. It was the small, desperate sound someone makes when their body forgets how to breathe. She stumbled back, knocking over her chair, and her book slid to the floor. When she blinked again, the window reflected only the storm. The girl was gone, but the lake wasn't calm anymore. The rain danced over its surface, disturbed by circles of ripples that seemed to spread from a single point, the spot where the figure had fallen. They grew wider and wider until they touched the edges of the shore, and then they simply stopped. Cassandra told herself she'd imagined it. She said it out loud to no one. "You imagined it." The sound of her voice steadied her somehow. She gathered her books, slipped them into her bag, and told herself that the person she saw falling was fine, or that she hadn't seen anyone at all. It was late. She was tired. The human brain fills in gaps. It misinterprets light. She repeated these things as she left the library, the words a kind of charm against the growing unease that followed her out into the rain. The parking lot was empty. Her umbrella had broken earlier that week, so she covered her head with her bag and ran toward her car, shoes slapping against the wet pavement. The air was thick with the smell of earth and ozone. Somewhere in the distance, the lake groaned under the pressure of the storm, a low and resonant sound like breath trapped beneath glass. She drove home through streets slick with water, her wipers smearing the world into streaks of gray. When she reached her apartment and locked the door behind her, she felt a sudden weight lift from her chest. The silence of the room was immense. She took off her soak jacket and hung it on the back of a chair, trying to convince herself that the shiver that ran through her wasn't fear, only cold. But when she passed the hallway mirror, on her way to the bedroom, she stopped. There was moisture on the glass. Condensation, a thin sheen of fog as though someone had breathed against it moments before. She wiped it with her palm, expecting to see her own tired reflection. What she saw instead made her freeze. Behind her image, faint but unmistakable, was another silhouette, tall, narrow, a figure standing in the doorway behind her, motionless. Cassandra spun around. Nothing, just the door, slightly ajar, and the sound of rain against the windows. When she turned back, the mirror was clear again. Only her reflection stared back at her, now pale, trembling, eyes wide with something she refused to name. That night, she dreamed she was standing on the edge of the lake. The water was smooth as black glass, unbroken by rain or wind. Beneath the surface, something vast shifted in outline, an eye opening, and when she leaned over the water, she saw not her own reflection, but the girl in the white dress staring up at her, her mouth moving slowly, as if speaking through water. When Cassandra woke, the storm had passed, but the echo of that whisper still clung to her thoughts, impossible to shake. She went to the window, half expecting to see the lake still roiling in the distance. But the sky was clear, the morning sun already warming the wet pavement below. For a long time, she stood there, watching the light play on the rooftops. Everything looked normal. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. Something in her vision had changed. The colors were sharper, almost painfully vivid. The world shimmered at its edges, and every time she blinked, the afterimage of a white dress lingered a little too long in the corner of her eye. When she closed the blinds and turned away from the window, she caught her reflection in the glass again just for a heartbeat and swore she saw water dripping from her hair. It began the morning after the storm. The rain had stopped, but everything inside my apartment still felt damp. The air heavy, the curtains sticking to the window frames, and the scent of mildew curling through the vents. I woke up with the taste of iron in my mouth, as if I had been chewing coins in my sleep. My eyes ached, a deep pulsing pain that made the light unbearable. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion. The night before, I'd barely slept. I kept replaying what I'd seen through the library window, that flash of white, the dark shape falling, the splash that felt too loud, too deliberate. I told myself it wasn't real. It couldn't be. But then I looked up from my pillow, and I saw her, standing outside my window, where the reflection of the early sun should have been, was a figure in a white dress. The same pale outline I'd seen by the lake. She wasn't moving, not really, more like flickering between stillness and breath, as though the air itself couldn't decide whether she was real. I blinked once, twice. The pain in my eyes sharpened. When I opened them again, she was gone. That was the first time. By the third day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The world had begun to lose its edges. The letters in my textbook swam, twisting into black rivers that drained off the pages. My professors' faces blurred until they became masks without eyes or mouths. I sat through an entire lecture without realizing I was staring at the wall. My notes just loops of ink bleeding across the paper. When I looked in the mirror that night, I barely recognized myself. My pupils were dilated, drowning out the green of my irises. Tiny red veins branched out like roots beneath my eyelids. And behind me, just for a heartbeat, the white dress flickered again. I turned so fast I fell backward into the sink. Nothing there. But the mirror had fog slightly, and in the mist I thought I saw the shape of a handprint. Small, feminine, wet. I went to the campus clinic the next morning. The doctor, a woman with gentle eyes and a practiced smile, ran a series of tests. She shone lights into my pupils, asked me to follow her finger to read the letters on the chart. I could barely make out the first row. Temporary visual impairment, she said. It might be stress related. Have you been sleeping? I almost laughed. Not really. She prescribed rest, told me to avoid screens and bright lights, and suggested therapy. But before she left the room, she hesitated, glancing back at me. Miss Vale, she said, you've got something in your eyes. I can't explain it. Like a reflection that doesn't match the light source. I frowned. What do you mean? She shook her head. It's probably nothing. But as she left, I caught sight of her reflection in the mirror opposite the bed, and it wasn't her face that looked back. It was the woman in the white dress. That night, I dreamt of the lake. I was back in the library, rain hammering the windows. Only this time the storm was inside. The bookshelves were dripping, water pooled beneath the reading tables, and outside the window, the surface of the lake was calm, impossibly calm, as if waiting. Then, a ripple. A hand broke the surface, pale and thin. The same hand I'd seen pressed against the glass. It reached up, trembling, searching for something to hold. Help me, a voice whispered. It came from behind me. I turned, and she was there, the girl in white, her eyes hollow, her lips moving soundlessly. Her hair was plastered against her face, dripping dark water onto the floor. You saw him fall, she said, voice like wet gravel. You saw me watching. I tried to step back, but my feet were rooted. Her face twitched, as if cracking under invisible pressure. Now, you must see what I see. M. Then she reached out and I felt her fingers touch my eyelids, cold and slick like something pulled from a river. When I woke up, I couldn't see the morning light. For 2 days I lived in shadow. The doctors said my vision had collapsed into temporary blindness, though they couldn't explain why the pupils still reacted faintly to light. My friends visited, voices soft and unsure. Someone brought flowers. Someone else brought food I couldn't recognize. I tried to stay calm, but the world had changed. Even without sight, I could sense her. At first it was just the sound, a slow dripping, like water sliding down the inside of the walls. Then came the smell, faint and metallic, like rusted metal mixed with wet earth. At night, I felt cold air move across my face, carrying the scent of algae and rot. And once, when I reached out into the dark, I touched something damp, fabric, smooth, like silk, the hem of a dress. I started recording myself after that, voice memos on my phone, anything to track the hours I couldn't see. Sometimes, when I played them back, there were other sounds beneath my breathing. A faint sob, a splash, the whisper of my own name, Cassandra. The way she said it made my chest ache, like she was calling me from underwater. I searched for the story. The man who fell into the lake, his name was Andrew Lowell, a graduate assistant. Found dead the next morning, drowned, though the police said there were bruises around his neck that didn't match a fall. The case was ruled accidental, but there was a photo in one of the old newspaper archives. It showed the search team by the lake, and in the background, blurry but unmistakable, stood a girl in white. Her face was turned away from the camera, but her reflection in the water looked directly at it, at me. The night before the blindness became permanent, I heard knocking at my window. 3 slow taps. I froze in bed, every muscle trembling. Tap, tap, tap. I forced myself to turn my head. Through the faint light leaking from the street lamp outside, I saw a silhouette, thin, still, framed by the glass. The white dress clung to her like wet paper. Her hair was matted against her cheeks, dripping onto the windowsill. In her eyes, black pits ringed with a faint white shimmer were fixed on me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. She raised her hand, pressing it against the glass. Water streaked down in rivulets. Then she leaned forward, her breath fogging the window. A single word appeared in the mist. "I'll see." Then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing by the lake. I don't remember how I got there. My bare feet were sunk into the cold mud, the moonlight fractured by waves. The water looked alive, shifting and whispering as if it had 1,000 mouths. And across the surface, she stood once more, her white dress flowing like mist, her eyes gleaming with that endless hunger. "You looked," she said. "You always look." Her voice echoed inside my head. "Now you'll bear the weight." I felt it then, a sudden heaviness behind my eyes, like something pushing outward, desperate to escape. My knees buckled. The world tilted. I saw flashes, faces drowning, hands reaching, mouths gasping for air, and in every reflection, every ripple, every window pane, every drop of water, I saw her watching me, waiting for the next witness. The last thing I remembered before collapsing was her whisper. "Sight is a curse, Cassandra. You'll understand soon." When I woke in the hospital, the nurses said I had been found by the lake's edge, unconscious and soaked through, eyes wide open but seeing nothing. They told me I was lucky to be alive. But as I lay there, listening to the drip of water from the IV tube, I realized what had happened. I wasn't the witness anymore. I was the reflection. And somewhere, beyond the hospital window, in the trembling shimmer of the rain-soaked glass, someone new was watching me. The doctor said my blindness might be reversible, but they didn't see what I saw in the dark. It's strange, when the eyes fail, you think the world would go quiet. You think blindness means emptiness, silence, a sort of peace. But for me, the dark only made everything louder. The walls pulsed with sound. The floorboards breathed. The air whispered. And beneath it all, like a heart that didn't belong to me, I could hear the lake. Every night it spoke. Not in words, not really, but in rhythm. The slow, rhythmic sound of water slapping against stone, of bubbles rising, bursting, sinking. I began to know its moods. When it was calm, it hummed. When it was angry, it hissed through the pipes. I started hearing it, even when I was far from campus. It was during my 3rd week of recovery that the therapist, Dr. Keene, asked me to describe what happened. Her office smelled of lavender and old books. The window behind her chair let in the faintest hum of rain, as if the weather was trying to listen too. "I'd like you to tell me about that night again," she said softly. "You mentioned a girl." I nodded, hands twisting in my lap. She wasn't just a girl. She was watching, waiting. I think she wanted me to see. Dr. Keene's pen buzzed. "See what?" "The truth," I whispered. "What happens after you witness something you weren't supposed to?" She leaned forward. "And what did you witness, Cassandra?" Her voice was careful, like she was stepping through fog. I hesitated. "A man fell into the lake. I saw him. I saw her standing there, looking down at him. I thought she pushed him, but I don't know anymore. Why? Because every time I close my eyes, I'm there again. And she's not pushing him, she's reaching for me." "Doctor," Keene wrote something down. "Do you believe she's real?" I turned my head toward the window, where the faint sound of dripping echoed from somewhere outside, real enough that she's still watching. The next day, the lights in my hospital room began to flicker. The nurses said it was the storm. Power surges. Nothing unusual, but I could feel her presence again faint, like static on the skin. Whenever someone walked in with a tray or adjusted my IV, I could tell when they looked into the window. Their voices faltered. Their hands trembled. And once, one of them whispered to another nurse outside my door. She was standing right there, the one in white. I swear she blinked. And they never said it around me again. The blindness began to shift after that, not healing, not improving, but changing. It wasn't darkness anymore. It was something else. A gray, humming veil. I began to see shapes in it, not through my eyes, but behind them. Shadows that moved, even when I stayed still. And when I slept, I dreamed of faces pressing against glass. Hundreds of them. Some were drowned. Some were screaming. Some had mouths full of lake water and weeds. But all of them had one thing in common. Their eyes were open, watching. I woke up gasping, my hands clutching at my chest, and realized that I could still feel the weight of one of them pressing down on me, as if someone had been sitting there, silently, while I slept. When I told Dr. Keene, she suggested it was phantom sensation, the brain's way of processing trauma through sensory confusion. But she didn't understand. It wasn't phantom. It was transfer. The weight I felt wasn't symbolic. It was literal. I could feel her hand pressing on my shoulder, the fabric of her dress brushing my wrist. Sometimes, when I inhaled too sharply, I caught the faint smell of algae, damp, organic, the scent of something pulled from deep water. And then, on the fifth night, I heard her speak again. It came from inside the mirror. "Cassandra," she whispered, the sound trembling through the glass. "Do you remember the eyes?" My voice cracked. "What do you want?" "To be seen," she said. "Like you were." I felt the air in the room grow heavy, as if invisible water had filled it. My lungs burned. I couldn't move. "Every witness becomes the reflection," she murmured. "Every reflection must carry the weight." And before I could scream, I saw her face behind my eyelids, not like a dream, but like she was staring through me. The next morning I could see again. Not clearly, more like through fogged glass. The outlines of the room were dull and colorless. Everything shimmered faintly, as if underwater. At first I was grateful. I thought it meant recovery. But when I looked into the mirror, I realized something was wrong. My reflection blinked half a second too late. I tried to tell Dr. Keene, but she said hallucinations were a part of trauma recovery. "Your brain is filling in sensory gaps," she said. "It's a sign of healing." But the reflection began to move differently. Subtle, almost imperceptible things, a tilt of the head, a smile that lingered too long. Once, I caught it whispering something silently, lips forming words I couldn't hear. That's when I started covering every mirror in the apartment. Sheets, blankets, anything I could find. It didn't matter. The glass in my phone, the reflection in the faucet, even the window at night, all of them shimmered faintly, like water rippling from the inside. And always, always, the faint outline of the white dress hovered at the edge of sight. A week later, I received a message. No name, no number, just one line. "Do you see them yet?" I deleted it immediately, but the words stayed in my head. Them, not her, not it, them. That night, I understood why. The reflections weren't hers alone anymore. They were filled with faces. Dozens, all staring back, their eyes hollow, their mouths opening and closing as if trying to speak. I leaned closer to the mirror, stupid, terrified, but unable to look away. The surface began to tremble, and then I saw it. Beneath all those drowned faces, one of them was mine. After that, time dissolved. Days bled into nights. I stopped answering calls. My friends thought I'd left the city, but I was still here, trapped in my own apartment, afraid of every surface that could hold a reflection. Sometimes I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, stopping right at my door. Then silence. Then the sound of water dripping under the threshold. Other times, the lights would go out, and when they came back, the mirrors I'd covered would be uncovered again. She was inside, not in body, Not yet, but in essence. I started keeping a journal to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The last entry I remember writing went like this. If the eyes are windows to the soul, what happens when the window doesn't belong to you anymore? I think she lives in mine now. I think when I blink, she sees. After that, the entries stopped, because the weight began. It started as a pressure at the back of my head, like being pulled backward by unseen hands. Then came the whispering low, constant, hundreds of voices, just beneath hearing. Every word they spoke pushed against my skin, pressed into my bones, filled me with something heavy and cold. They were inside me, the forgotten ones. Every face I'd seen in the water, every reflection, every drowned witness, all of them carried inside my chest, whispering to be remembered. I couldn't bear it. So I went back to the lake. It was midnight when I arrived. The sky was cloudless, the water black and still. The moonlight shimmered across the surface, and for a moment, I saw my reflection not as I was, but as she had been, pale, trembling, eyes wide and empty. The white dress waited at the opposite shore, rippling like smoke. "You carry them," she said. Her voice came from the water itself. "The ones who looked, the ones who forgot." "I don't want this," I whispered. "Please take it back." She tilted her head. "Once you see, you belong. The living must bear the weight of the drowned." And then the water began to move. Faces rose from beneath the surface, hundreds of them, mouths open, hands reaching. Their eyes glowed faintly, like dying stars. I felt them pulling at me, begging me to join. But the worst part was, they didn't sound angry. They sounded relieved. "Come," the girl in white said. "The living never last long." I ran. I don't remember the path, or the trees, or the rain that began to fall, only that I reached the edge of the lake again and looked back one last time. The surface had gone still, but in the faint shimmer of moonlight, I saw my reflection smiling. Not my smile, hers. And in that instant, I understood. The weight of the living isn't the burden of life itself. It's the burden of memory. Every witness carries the dead. Every reflection bears a soul. And now, when I blink, the world ripples slightly, as though it's waiting for me to sink beneath it. They say when someone drowns, their body becomes heavier than the water, until they let go and float to the surface. I think that's what's happening to me. I'm just waiting to let go, waiting to see who looks next. The city's grown quieter since the night I returned from the lake. Or maybe I've become too hollow to hear it properly. Sound doesn't reach me in the same way anymore. It arrives, dulled, like I'm listening through glass, or from beneath a layer of water. Even my own voice feels delayed, as though it doesn't belong to me. I stopped going to therapy. I stopped answering calls. The university sent me an email about withdrawing for the semester. I never replied. I live now in a kind of suspended quiet, a rhythm between waking and remembering. Sometimes I think about the girl in the white dress, but more often I think about the others, the ones under the lake, whose faces pressed against mine in the mirror, whose weight fills my chest. Their murmurs have faded into something else. Not words, not quite, more like breathing. But lately, one voice rises above the others, a woman's voice, fragile and cracked, repeating a single sentence, over and over again. 10 lives for one sight. At first, I thought it was another fragment of guilt, something my mind invented to punish me. But then the dreams began. In the dreams, I'm standing by the lake again, except it isn't the lake anymore. It's a kind of enormous, still eye. The surface doesn't reflect the sky, only movement. Beneath the surface, something watches back. Not one thing, but many, joined together in a slow, pulsing rhythm. Each time I dream, another pair of eyes opens in the dark beneath that surface. Some human, some not. And every time I wake, I can remember one more name. The first was Evan, then Lily, then Sarah. Names I've never spoken before. Names that taste like dust and cold metal. I started writing them down, one by one, on the wall above my bed. At first, it was to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But after the 10th name, the writing changed. My handwriting stopped looking like mine. The letters grew thin, shaking, etched deeper than the marker could go, as if carved. I tell myself I'm imagining it, but each night the list grows, and each morning I wake with water on my hands, not sweat, not condensation. Water. It smells like rain and something old. Once, I found a single white hair tangled between my fingers, long, smooth, and cold. I don't have hair that color. That's when I realized what the whisper meant. 10 lives for one sight. It isn't about me dying. It's about balance. For every witness who sees the truth, 10 lives must fall beneath it. The weight of that thought has made it difficult to move through the city. Every stranger's face becomes unbearable, the woman reading at the bus stop, the man feeding pigeons, the child laughing by the fountain. They all seem temporary, fragile, as if their bodies are made of paper and my gaze might tear them. I stop looking directly at people, but I can feel them looking back. And sometimes, when I turn quickly, I catch it a flicker, like a second layer of the world, slightly out of sync, as though everyone is reflected in an invisible sheet of glass that trails just behind them. When they blink, I see something blink afterward. I don't sleep much anymore. The dreams have grown heavier, slower. 2 nights ago, I woke up to find my apartment filled with the smell of wet fur. Not the unpleasant kind, but raw, animal, unmistakable. I sat up, heart racing, and saw movement at the foot of the bed. A cat. Small, black, its eyes pale green like lake water. It stared at me for a long time before curling up in the corner. I thought it was a hallucination until I heard it purring, soft and rhythmic. When I got up to touch it, it vanished. The next morning, I found wet paw prints leading to the window, and written across the condensation was a single word: 10th. That day, I remembered the story I'd once read in an article about near-death experiences, a boy who fell from a great height and claimed he'd been caught by something made of hands. He survived, but everyone said it was impossible. The old woman who tried to save him had died instantly. I thought it was just a coincidence until I saw that same name, Evan, already written on my wall. I started researching more. Missing persons, drownings, suicides. The deeper I looked, the more patterns appeared. 10 lives lost for every unexplained survival near the lake. The same whispers, the same reflections, the same eyes. Maybe the girl in white wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense. Maybe she was a keeper, the collector of balance, the one who ensures the debt is paid. On the 6th night, the cat returned. I didn't turn the lights on. I just listened to it move through the apartment, slow and deliberate. It made no sound, except for the soft drip of water when it walked. When I finally looked, I saw its reflection before I saw its body shimmering faintly on the floorboards, its eyes shining from a place that wasn't quite here. "Are you real?" I asked softly. It tilted its head, and I could have sworn it smiled. Then, in a voice that wasn't a voice, I heard her again. The girl in white. 10 lives, Cassandra," she whispered through the cat's gaze. "You saw what should never be seen. The balance must return." I wanted to scream, but the sound froze in my throat. The cat walked toward me, its paws leaving faint marks of water that shimmered like light through glass. It rubbed against my leg. Cold, too cold, and then it was gone. But the word 10th burned in my mind long after. By morning, the world felt heavier. Every sound, every movement coated in an invisible thickness. And as I sat by the window, watching the lake from afar, I saw a reflection move in the corner of the glass, a shape in white. She wasn't in the lake this time. She was inside the reflection itself, pressed against the surface like she was waiting for me to blink. When she moved, her mouth opened. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel them. "One remains." Then she was gone. Later that day, a friend from my literature class, Maria, came to visit. She was one of the few who still checked on me. "You look pale," she said. "Are you eating at all?" I nodded. "Lying." She laughed softly, looking around the apartment. "You still keeping everything covered like this?" "What are you afraid of, Cass?" Her tone was playful, but the question made my chest tighten. Before I could answer, she walked to the window and pulled the sheet away. The reflection hit us both, the light, the shimmer, the faint image of the lake behind her, and in that instant, I saw her expression freeze. Her pupils widened, her breath caught. Then, very slowly, she turned to me and said, "There's someone standing behind you." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. When I finally turned, there was nothing there. But when I looked back at the glass, the figure in white had shifted closer to Maria's side of the reflection. Her fingers were touching the glass. Maria stumbled backward, hands trembling. "What is that?" I reached for her, but before I could speak, the light flickered and the reflection shattered. Not the window, the image. Her face split in the glass, fragments of her expression moving separately, as though each piece existed in a different moment of time. And in the echo of that silence, I heard the lake again, deep, hollow, endless. 10 lives for one sight. Maria collapsed. She didn't die, not yet, but her eyes went blank, her mouth working soundlessly. I called an ambulance, my voice shaking, trying to explain that she'd fainted. They took her away, still breathing, but her reflection stayed in the glass long after. That night, the cat came back. It sat on the table, staring at the broken window. Then it turned to me, and I swear I heard it whisper, not in the girl's voice this time, but in Maria's. 10, Cassandra. 10 for you. 10 for her. Hi. The realization came like cold water. Every witness passes it on. The curse doesn't die, it migrates. It needs an unbroken line of sight, and I had just given her one. I think about breaking the cycle sometimes, about walking into the lake, letting it swallow me whole, returning the weight to where it belongs. But part of me is terrified that even that wouldn't end it, that she'd find another reflection, another eye to stare through. Maybe she already has, because when I close my eyes now, I don't see darkness anymore. I see her hand pressed against the glass, waiting for someone else to look. And in the distance, the cat watches, its green eyes glowing softly. 10 lives for one sight. I think the 10th life is mine, but the 10th death, that will be whoever reads this next. The silence that came after the storm was not peace, it was paralysis. Evan stood at the edge of the old apartment's corridor, barefoot, staring at the flickering light above him. His clothes were soaked, his hands trembling with the scent of rust and rain. Behind him, the stairwell descended into darkness like the throat of something alive, waiting to swallow him whole. He couldn't tell if he was still breathing. The world around him had grown thin. The walls looked as if they were made of wet paper, with faint silhouettes shifting behind them, human shapes, feline curves, hollow eyes. The smell of the lake clung to him, though he hadn't been near it for days. The cats had followed him here, silent as guilt. 9 shadows, moving where there should be none. And then, a 10th. It stood at the end of the hall, a small figure wrapped in an old shawl, her hands wrinkled, her back bent. Her eyes gleamed like shards of moonlight caught in murky water. "Evan," the old woman croaked. He didn't remember walking toward her, but suddenly he was close enough to smell the decay. Her breath was not breath. It was the hiss of wind escaping a sealed room. "I didn't mean to." "You never mean to," she interrupted. "None of you ever do. But meaning doesn't matter when the feast begins." Evan froze. "The feast?" She smiled, or at least her mouth moved in a way that resembled it. "The living forget the dead, and the forgotten must feed." Her hand rose, trembling but deliberate, and pointed to the floor. Evan looked down. Beneath his feet, the tiles had darkened, softening into rippling black water. Reflections formed faces he recognized and faces he didn't. The students from the dormitory, the janitor who'd tried to save him, the cats with matted fur and shattered bones, and his own face still falling, eternally suspended in that moment between the rooftop and the street. I I don't understand, Evan whispered. The old woman's voice broke into a rasping laugh. Then look closer. The floor rippled again, and the reflections began to move. He saw himself lying on a hospital bed, motionless. Machines beeped beside him. Nurses came and went. His mother's voice cracked as she begged the doctor for updates. And there, at the foot of the bed, stood the old woman, the same one before him, now her hands cupped as if holding something invisible. Your body is still alive, she said, echoing his thoughts. But the soul is what we dine upon. Every scream, every regret, every heartbeat that refused to end each is a morsel on the plate of the forgotten. Evan staggered back. You're lying. But the shadows didn't flinch. The cats circled closer, tails dragging through the watery floor. Their eyes glowed, not yellow but red, like dying embers behind glass. You remember what they said, the old woman murmured. The nurses. She saved you. They spoke of me as if I were still human, but I wasn't. I was already part of the feast. He shook his head violently. You tried to stop me. I tried to keep you out, but you fell through the door anyway. Him. Her hand swept outward, and suddenly, the corridor unfolded like paper walls peeling away to reveal the lake, vast and ink black, stretching endlessly. The sound of water lapping against unseen shores filled the space. The surface shimmered with faces, thousands of them, each opening and closing its mouth silently, as if chewing something unseen. The feast of the forgotten, she whispered. Every soul that dies unnoticed becomes part of it. Every witness who looks away becomes its next course. Evan's breath came shallow. He felt the cold seeping through his skin, into his bones. Then why am I still here? Because you haven't decided who you'll feed. Her words struck like a pulse through his skull. The lake pulsed with light, brief, sharp bursts of white. He saw visions with every flash. Cassandra's blind eyes staring into nothing. The girl in the white dress standing by the window. The bodies falling in slow motion through the night rain. The same story repeating. Witness. Victim. Ghost. A cycle without an ending. And now, it was his turn. I don't want to hurt anyone, Evan said hoarsely. Then starve, the old woman hissed. Starve until you vanish like the rest. But know this hunger never forgets its name. The water surged upward, swallowing her voice. Evan stumbled backward, but the floor had already dissolved. His foot sank into the cold. Then the other. The water climbed his legs, his chest, his throat. He screamed, but the sound came out as a meow. 9 echoes answered, circling him in the dark. And then he was under. He awoke in a hospital bed. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, thin and sterile. Machines beeped. A nurse entered the room, smiling faintly when she saw him stirring. You're awake, she said. Finally, his lips cracked when he tried to speak. How long? 3 weeks, she replied. You're lucky. Most don't make it after a fall like that. Her voice was calm, professional, but something about her eyes, it was wrong. They were too bright, too sharp. When she turned away to check the IV, Evan saw her reflection in the metal panel beside the bed. In the reflection, she wasn't smiling, and her eyes were Kat's eyes. He blinked hard. The vision was gone. Your family's been notified, she continued. You should rest. The doctor will be in soon. When she left, the room fell quiet again. The beeping steadied. The air thickened. Evan turned his head to the side and saw the old woman sitting in the chair by the window. He didn't jump. He didn't scream. He just stared. She looked smaller now, frailer, but her eyes burned with the same light as before. You came back, she said softly. I didn't have a choice. Evan replied, None of us do. Outside the window, the lake shimmered faintly. For a moment, he thought he saw ripples spreading from a single point, as if someone or something had just stepped into it. The old woman reached into her shawl and pulled out a small metal bowl. She placed it on the bedside table. Inside was milk fresh, white, and impossibly still. "It's for them," she said. Evan stared. "For who?" "You'll know when they come." She stood, her bones creaking. When she reached the door, she paused and looked back. "You survived because you were chosen. But survival is not mercy, Evan. It's invitation." Then she was gone. That night, he woke to a sound of faint scratching near the foot of his bed. He sat up slowly, eyes adjusting to the dark. The bowl of milk was empty. The scratching grew louder. Something was moving beneath the bed. He bent down. 9 pairs of eyes stared back at him from the shadows. The 10th blinked and smiled. He pressed the nurse's call button, but it made no sound. The monitors beside him were frozen. Time itself seemed to pause. The window was open now, the curtains breathing slowly in the night air. From the corridor came a distant cry, half human, half feline, all agony. Evan rose. The floor felt like water beneath his feet. He walked to the window, drawn by something ancient and patient. The lake stretched beyond the hospital grounds, wider than it had any right to be, the moonlight trembling across its surface. In the reflection, he saw the old woman standing behind him. Her mouth moved silently. "Feed them," he heard her say, not with sound, but through the pulse of his own heartbeat. He turned around. The hospital was gone. He was back at the lake, standing waist-deep in the black water. Around him, figures were gathering, people and animals and shadows that had forgotten what they once were. The air was filled with the scent of wet fur, rust, and lilies. In the center of the lake, a great table emerged, carved from the bones of the drowned. Upon it lay offerings, broken photographs, shattered mirrors, hair tied with ribbons, scraps of memory. The guests took their places silently. Evan's seat waited at the head. The old woman stood beside it. "It's time," she said. "For what?" "For you to remember what forgetting costs." She handed him a cup made of glass so thin it seemed made of ice. Inside it swirled the reflection of his own face and 10 others. He drank. The taste was not liquid. It was guilt, sharp and metallic, flooding his mouth. Every heartbeat he'd stolen, every scream he'd ignored, every life tethered to his. He could feel them settling inside him like stones. When he lowered the cup, the lake was silent. The old woman smiled faintly. "Now, you are one of us." She reached out, touching his forehead, and he remembered all of it. The fall, the cats, the blindness, the mirror of the lake, the feast that never ended. When the police found Evan's body days later, it was sitting upright in the hospital bed. His eyes were open, reflecting something that shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light. 9 cat paw prints marked the bedsheet, and on the table beside him, the empty bowl of milk still glistened wet, as if freshly placed. From the window, faint ripples disturbed the reflection of the sky, as though something had just slipped quietly back into the lake. The forgotten never starve. They only wait to be remembered. The anatomy of fear. The first time I saw the lanterns, they were floating down the river like soft burning eyes. Each one carried a name written in black ink, smudged by the mist that rose from the water. It was the 7th day after the feast. The village still smelled of burnt sugar and spoiled rice wine, that cloying scent that always lingered after offerings rotted on the altars. I hadn't slept properly since the night of the final meal. My dreams still tasted of ash and whispering. I told myself the lanterns were just part of the morning rites. That's what everyone said. When the living forget the dead, the river remembers. The villagers float lanterns to guide lost souls back to the water. But these were different. They drifted upstream. At first I thought it was just the wind, the currents reversing for a moment. But when I leaned closer, I saw something moving beneath the surface, something pushing them from below, like pale hands cupping each one tenderly, as if afraid to let them go. I didn't want to believe what I saw. I told myself grief makes the eyes lie. Still, when the first lantern reached the riverbank and the name became legible in the moonlight, I froze. It was my own. I burned that lantern before dawn, dragged it to the old kiln behind my house, and set it aflame with oil and salt. It hissed and spat, the wax bubbling like living skin. The villagers told me later I shouldn't have done that. You're not supposed to destroy a river's gift. It remembers. But how was I supposed to accept it, a floating omen bearing my name in someone else's handwriting? Since the feast, everything in this place has turned unfamiliar. The dogs bark at empty corners. The crows don't leave the rooftops. Just sit there watching as if waiting for something to happen. And at night, from the forest beyond the shrine, you can hear the sound of wet feet dragging across the roots. Some say it's the forgotten ones, those who weren't fed, whose names were skipped when the offerings were laid. Others whisper that it's the living, already chosen, walking in their sleep toward the river's mouth. I used to laugh at those stories. But now, each time I close my eyes, I see that lantern again, and the blackened ink that refused to vanish, even after the flames ate through the paper. It still spelled my name. The next night I went to see the priest. He lived at the edge of the forest, in a house made of bamboo and dried palm leaves. They said he used to be a monk, but left the temple after he began hearing voices in the wind. When I entered, he was already waiting as though he had heard my footsteps from a mile away. His face was hidden by shadow, but I could make out the glint of wet eyes. "You saw your name," he said, before I could speak. "Yes," I answered. "How did you—" "They always come in pairs. One to be carried, one to be claimed." I didn't understand. He gestured for me to sit, his bony fingers trembling slightly as he poured something into a small cup. It looked like tea, but it smelled faintly of rust. "Every year," he said, "the feast forgets someone, not by mistake, by debt." Debt? The dead remember kindness and cruelty. If you owe the river something, it sends your name back to you. Not to punish, to remind. Yeah, I wanted to laugh, to call it nonsense, but his words crawled into my spine, because deep down, I knew a debt he was talking about. Last winter, when my mother died, I didn't send her lantern. I couldn't bear to write her name, to let the water take her from me. I kept the paper blank and buried it behind the house. The priest looked at me as if he had read the confession from my thoughts. "You kept her name from the water," he whispered, "so the water took yours instead." I left before dawn. The river was awake again, the mist moving in slow circles like breath on glass. More lanterns floated that morning, dozens, maybe hundreds, all drifting the wrong way. When I leaned close, I noticed something strange. Every flame flickered in rhythm, like synchronized heartbeats. The names were different, but the light pulsed the same. And then I saw one that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a name. It was a sentence. "Come see what she remembers." And the handwriting was my mother's. For the next 3 nights, I tried not to look at the river. I closed the shutters, burned incense, played the radio loud to drown out the rustling outside. But the sound still came, a soft knocking, like fingertips against glass. Sometimes from the window, sometimes from the floorboards beneath my bed. On the 4th night, I finally followed it. It led me through the garden, past the old well, down the narrow path that ran parallel to the riverbank. The moon was low, swollen, bleeding light over the water, and there they were, hundreds of lanterns, clustered together, drifting in a slow spiral like a blooming flower. At the center of the circle stood a woman. She wore a white mourning dress, soaked to the waist, her hair clinging to her face like roots. She held one lantern in her hands unlit. When she turned, I saw my mother's eyes staring back at me. "Why didn't you let me rest?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired, almost pleading. "I didn't want to lose you," I whispered, "but you did." Long before the water came for me, the lantern in her hands began to tremble. She dipped it into the river, and it lit itself. No fire, no spark, just a quiet blue flame. The light spread across the surface, connecting all the other lanterns like veins of light. "Every name must return," she said, "even yours." When I looked down, I saw my reflection ripple, and for the first time, It smiled back. Then it whispered my name. I don't remember what happened after that. The next thing I knew, it was morning. I was lying beside the river, my clothes soaked, my fingers pruned and pale. The lanterns were gone, every last one. But on the shore, written in the mud beside me, were 3 words in my mother's handwriting. One debt remains. The villagers say I've changed since that night. They avoid me when I walk past the market, pretend not to hear when I greet them. I caught my reflection in a shop window yesterday, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the eyes staring back. There's a faint glow behind them now, like something still burning underwater. I can feel it sometimes, when the wind carries the scent of the river, the pulse, the slow heartbeat of the forgotten calling me back to finish what began. I think I understand what the priest meant now. The feast never truly ends. It only waits for the next name to be written, the next lantern to drift upstream. And tonight, as I sit by the shore with the ink brush in my hand, I realize what the last debt must be. It isn't to the dead. It's to the living, those who refuse to remember. So I dip the brush in ink, let the black drip onto the paper, and begin to write. Not my name this time. Yours. I haven't slept since that night by the river. I've tried. I've begged for sleep. But every time I close my eyes, I see the lanterns rising again, drifting backward through the current, carrying names I've never written. Sometimes I think I can hear them whisper. Not voices exactly, but the sound of breath moving through hollow things, reeds, bones, old wood, and beneath it all, the steady pulse of something that no longer belongs to the living. The villagers avoid me now. At first, they just stared with that half-curious, half-fearful look people give to the newly cursed, but soon their faces turned away completely. Even the children stopped calling my name. They run when they see me, as if my shadow might stain their feet. There's one who doesn't. Her name is Huyen, the priest's granddaughter. She's barely 16, but there's something ancient in her eyes, a kind of exhaustion that belongs to those who have already seen too much of the dark. She brings me food sometimes, leaves it at the door without knocking. A bowl of congee, a piece of salted fish, a flask of bitter tea. Each time, there's a scrap of paper tucked beneath the bowl. Always the same handwriting. Always the same sentence. The ones who never sleep will come for you. I tried to ask the priest what it meant, but when I reached his house at the forest's edge, the door was open, and the incense had gone cold. Inside, the floor was covered with lantern husks, hundreds of them, burned out, melted together into one blackened shape. The air reeked of wax and river rot. On the wall, carved into the bamboo with something sharp, was a single phrase repeated over and over: "Don't answer the second knock." That night, I heard it. It came just after midnight, 3 slow knocks on the door. Not forceful, just deliberate. The kind of sound that says, "I know you're awake." I waited. My heart thudded in time with each echo. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then silence. I almost convinced myself it had been the wind. But then came another series, softer this time, from the window. 1, 2, 3. I remembered the carving on the wall. "Don't answer the second knock." So I sat perfectly still until the sound stopped. When dawn came, I found footprints in the mud outside. Bare, small, and wet, as if someone had walked straight out of the river and up to my door. The next few days blurred together. I stopped eating, stopped speaking. Even the sunlight felt wrong, pale, and weak, like it was being filtered through another world. Each night, the knocking came again. Always twice door, then window. Always slow, always waiting. By the 5th night, something changed. Between the knocks, I began to hear breathing. Not mine. And once, when I dared to glance toward the window, I saw a handprint form on the glass. The shape was small, delicate like a child's, but the fingers were far too long. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion is a cruel thing. It sneaks into you like fog, whispering that maybe just a few minutes of rest won't hurt. That's when they came. It wasn't a dream. I know that much. Dreams don't smell like river mud and burnt wax. I woke to find the room full of light, but not the golden kind. It was blue, cold, the same hue as the flames on the river lanterns. They were standing in the corner, 3 figures, small and hunched, their faces hidden by long, dripping hair. Each one carried a lantern in their hands, the flame inside flickering in time with the pulse of my heartbeat. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. The tallest one, a woman, I think, stepped closer. I could hear the water dripping from her hair onto the floor, slow and rhythmic. When she lifted her lantern, I saw that it was made from something that looked disturbingly familiar. Skin, pale, thin, stretched tight around a frame of reeds. My stomach turned. The flame inside it wasn't fire at all, it was something alive, pulsing softly like an exposed organ. The woman raised her free hand and pointed at me. Her voice, when it came, was like the wind moving through reeds, dry and fragile, yet endless. "Wake them," she said, and before I could move, the lanterns in her companion's hands began to flare. Inside each one, shapes stirred faces pressing against the skin, mouths opening in silent screams. I recognized one of them, my mother. I don't remember how I got outside. One moment I was frozen, the next I was running barefoot through the fields, the wet earth clinging to my feet. Behind me, the river glowed faintly with blue light, and I could still hear their voices calling my name. When I finally collapsed near the shrine, the first thing I saw was Hyen standing beneath the banyan tree, holding a small knife and a bowl of salt. "You shouldn't have run," she said quietly. "What are they?" I gasped. "The ones who never sleep," she said. "They serve the feast. When the forgotten begin to remember, the feast sends them to collect what remains." "Collect what?" "Your waking, your voice, your breath." She glanced toward the river. "They take the parts of you that belong to the world of the living." I wanted to ask more, but she shook her head. "You can't stay here. Not until the debt is paid." "I already burned my name," I said. She looked at me for a long time, pity in her eyes. "That wasn't the debt. The debt is what you refused to remember." She took me to an old house on the far side of the fields, a place the villagers called the mourner's nest. It had once belonged to the family who kept the death records before the war, but the house had been abandoned for decades. Inside, everything smelled of mold and ink. Scrolls covered the walls, lists of names written in delicate black strokes, some so faded they looked like veins beneath old skin. "This is where the names wait," Huyen said, "until someone writes them again." She handed me a brush and a bowl of ink. "Write what you remember." I stared at the blank parchment. "What if I don't remember?" "Then write what remembers you." The words made no sense, but as I dipped the brush into the ink, my hand began to tremble. The strokes came without thought, the letters forming themselves one after another, until the parchment was full. When I looked down, I felt my throat close. The names were of people I had known, all gone now, but among them were others I didn't recognize at all. Yet they all shared one thing. They were written in my mother's handwriting. Huyen's eyes widened. "She's been writing through you," she whispered. "The river never let her go." That night, I dreamed, or thought I did. I was back at the river, but it wasn't water anymore. It was ink thick, black, and endless. Lanterns floated on its surface, but each one was upside down, their flames burning beneath the liquid. From the darkness below, figures rose. The same 3 who had come to my house, but now I could see their faces. Or rather, what was left of them. Eyes hollow, mouths sewn shut with red thread. The tallest one reached out and touched my cheek. Her fingers were cold and wet, but gentle. She whispered, "You wrote our names. Now we can rest." And then, softer, "But you cannot." When I woke, the ink bowl beside me was empty. Every parchment in the room was blank again except one. On it, written in fresh ink, was a single sentence. "The feast begins when the sleepers wake." Huyen found me sitting in the corner, staring at the parchment. "It's too late," she said quietly. "They've already taken your dreams." "What does that mean?" "It means you belong to both worlds now. You'll never sleep again, not until you give them what they came for." "What do they want?" She looked at me with eyes full of sorrow. "The last name, the one you haven't written yet." That was 3 nights ago. I've been sitting by the river ever since, waiting for the lanterns to return. My hands are stained black from ink. My eyes sting from the smoke of the incense I burn to keep them at bay. But they still whisper, from the water, from the trees, from inside my bones. Sometimes I see Hyen watching from the distance, her knife still tied to her wrist with a red string. She never approaches anymore. Maybe she knows what I'm about to do. Because tonight, the river is restless again. The mist glows faintly blue, and I can hear footsteps in the mud, slow, deliberate, in pairs. They've come back, and this time, I think I know what name they want me to write. The last one. The name that began it all. I dip the brush into the ink and whisper it aloud. My mother's. The river shudders, as if taking a breath. The surface ripples outward, lanterns rising from beneath like bubbles of trapped light. And as they drift toward me, I see their flames brighten one by one, until they merge into a single blinding pulse. The faces of the forgotten appear within it, calm now, eyes closed, finally at peace. But in the reflection beside them, I see myself. Eyes open, awake, forever. The ones who never sleep have claimed me. And somewhere, in the forest where the priest once lived, another lantern begins to form, carrying another name upstream. Maybe yours. The rain has not stopped for 7 days. It does not fall in sheets anymore. Only drifts of fine, endless drizzle that turns the air to mist and the ground to memory. They say the river is rising again. I can hear it from here, from the priest's abandoned house where I've been hiding since the night the lanterns returned. It sounds like a long, slow breath being drawn beneath the earth. Sometimes, I think it's breathing from me, the rhythm so steady that my pulse unconsciously matches it. Huyen came back yesterday. Her face looked older, her eyes darker. She didn't speak when she entered, only lit a stick of incense and placed it in the center of the floor. The smoke rose straight upward, then curved toward the wall as if pulled by something unseen. They're almost done remembering, she said quietly. Who? I asked. The ones the river took. The ones you called back. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from pity. That night I tried to burn the parchment, the one that held my mother's name. But the ink would not burn. It hissed, smoked, and bled, instead dark liquid running across the floorboards, forming patterns that looked like veins. The house smelled of iron and wet moss. When I wiped the floor clean, I noticed something carved beneath the ink. The faint outline of another name. Older, buried beneath the strokes. I could barely make it out. Khan, my father's name. I hadn't thought of him in years. He vanished when I was 12, swallowed by the river during a monsoon. They said it was an accident, but my mother never believed that. She used to whisper that the river doesn't take people, it trades for them. And now, as I stared at the name resurfacing from under the ink, I understood what she meant. The river wanted balance. It always had. When I stepped outside, the world had turned to silver. Mist hung over the fields, and the water reflected the clouds so perfectly that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Down by the bank, I saw shapes, dozens of them, kneeling in the mud. At first, I thought they were people, but as I drew closer, I realized they were statues. Or rather, they used to be. Each figure was molded from wax, partially melted, their faces distorted but strangely human. In the chest of every statue, a hollow cavity had been carved large enough to hold something small. A heart, a lantern, a name. Huyen was standing among them, her hands clasped, eyes closed. What are these? I asked. She opened her eyes slowly. Bodies for the forgotten. They look like they're waiting for something. They are. Her voice was a whisper. They're waiting for the names you haven't written yet. She led me closer to the water's edge. The surface was still, mirror flat. Beneath it, faintly, I could see shapes moving long, slow, graceful motions, as if a crowd were dancing just under the skin of the river. You called them, she said. Now they wait for you to finish what you started. I wanted to ask her how to stop it, but she was already staring into the current, her expression distant. When I was little, she said, the priest told me the river remembers everything that dies in it. but it forgets the order. So it tries to put the pieces back together, wrong faces, wrong names, wrong dreams. The feast feeds on that confusion. She looked at me then. You gave it your mother's name. Now it wants the rest of your blood. That night, I couldn't stay in the house. The air felt heavier with every breath, as though the walls were swelling with moisture. The sound of water dripped from the ceiling even though the roof didn't leak. I went back to the river. The statues were gone. Only the indentations remained, each one filled with dark water. I stood there, trembling, until I noticed a ripple moving upstream, not with the current against it. The ripple grew, and from the center of the river, something rose. It was a lantern, but unlike the others. Its light was deep crimson, throbbing like a wound. As it drifted closer, I saw that it was tied to something beneath the surface, a length of black rope that disappeared into the depths. The rope tugged once, twice. Then something heavy broke free. I bodied surfaced. It floated face down for a moment before the current turned it over. My father. The skin had gone pale, the lips dark and swollen, but the eyes were open, staring directly at me. His mouth began to move. Not words, not sound. Just the motion, slow and deliberate, as though repeating the same phrase again and again. I leaned closer to the water, desperate to hear. And then, faintly, I did. Write me back. When I returned to the house, the parchment and ink waited where I'd left them. My hands moved before I could think. The brush felt alive, vibrating slightly as I pressed it to the paper. I wrote his name. Once. Twice. A dozen times. The moment the last stroke dried, the sound began a low, deep groan like wood, twisting under water pressure. The walls shivered. The air thickened. I heard something crawl across the ceiling. Then came the whisper, from every corner at once. You've written the weight. The floor gave way beneath me. I fell through darkness, the smell of rot and river silt filling my lungs. When I landed, I was standing ankle-deep in cold water, surrounded by the faint shimmer of blue light. I was inside the river. It wasn't water anymore. It was memory, liquefied. Every ripple carried an image, a face, a moment, a breath. Some were familiar. My mother hanging the laundry, my father laughing at the dinner table. Others were strangers, dozens, hundreds, all flickering past me like reflections in shattered glass. And among them were lanterns, thousands of them, suspended in the darkness. Each one pulsed like a heartbeat. A voice spoke from behind me. You've carried their names too long. I turned. It was the priest, or what remained of him. His robes were soaked, his skin gray, his eyes hollow. The river remembers through you now, he said. That is the weight you feel. Then take it back, I shouted. I don't want it. He smiled sadly. No one ever does. But once you've written the forgotten, they live through your veins. The river can't take what has already become. He raised his hand, and the lanterns began to tremble. There's one way to end it, he whispered. You must drown the ink. How? He pointed upward. Find where the river begins. I woke on the shore, drenched, gasping for breath. The rain had stopped. The air was heavy and silent, as if the world were holding its breath. In my hand was the brush. The bristles were stained red. When I looked down, I saw the ink bowl beside me overturned, its contents seeping into the soil, forming thin red veins that crept toward the river. I followed them. They led me deep into the forest, past the fields and shrines, to a place I'd never seen before. A stone well half swallowed by roots. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if lit from within. I peered inside. The water was perfectly still, reflecting my face in impossible clarity. Then, slowly, another face formed beside mine. My mother's. She was smiling. It's not a well, she said softly. It's the mouth. The mouth of what? I whispered. Of where all names begin. Her reflection reached out and touched mine. The surface rippled. Behind her, I saw movement, countless faces, floating upward through the dark. They were the ones I had written, all of them, rising together toward me. "The weight of the river," she murmured. "It isn't meant to be carried. It's meant to be swallowed." Her hand broke the surface. Cold fingers brushed my cheek. "Come back to us." For a moment, I almost let her pull me in. But then I heard Hu Yen's voice behind me, distant but clear. "Don't drink the names." The reflection shattered. The spell broke. I fell backward, gasping, as the well erupted torrents of red water spilling out, flooding the roots, the soil, the air itself. And from within the flood, I heard the river speak, not in words, but in the sound of countless breaths drawn at once. It said, "Balance." Now I understand. The river doesn't punish. It remembers, and remembrance has weight. I feel it now. Inside my chest, the heaviness of every name I've ever written, pressing down like stones. Each beat of my heart feels slower, thicker, as if pumping water instead of blood. I think I'm becoming part of it. Hyen hasn't come back. Maybe she can't. Maybe the forest has swallowed her, too. I write this by candlelight, the last one I have. Outside, the rain has begun again, but it sounds different this time. Softer, almost tender, like fingers brushing against glass. The lanterns are floating past my window again. I can see faces inside them, calm and sleeping. But one of them is mine, and it's still awake. I haven't seen the stray cat since the day it stopped breathing, but at night, I can hear it. The sound comes from beneath the floorboards, a slow, uneven dragging, like claws scraping wood, or the soft rustle of fur against stone. I keep the lights on now, even when I sleep, though sleep isn't the right word. My body lies down, but my mind paces. The rhythm of fear replaces rest. Dr. Halbrook says what I'm experiencing is grief transference, that the death of something helpless has attached itself to the trauma I carry from before. You're assigning meaning to a random event, he says, because your mind can't tolerate chaos. But the chaos is not in my mind. It's here in this house. The night it began, the moon was low, red as rust. I'd just come home from the market, the last stretch of daylight dying behind the hills. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. When I opened the door, something smelled wrong. Not rotten, not quite, but old. Stale, damp, and strangely familiar, like the scent of an attic full of forgotten things. I set the groceries down and listened. Silence. Then, from the far corner of the kitchen under the sink came a sound. A soft, wet cough. I froze. There it was again, faint but deliberate. A rhythm, a pattern. I reached for the flashlight. The beam trembled as I lowered it toward the cabinet doors. The sound stopped. My own breath seemed to echo in the stillness. Then something moved. A shadow flickered along the floor. Too fast to be a rat, too low to be human. I opened the cabinet. Empty. But on the wooden base, a set of paw prints had been pressed into the dust. Small, delicate, and wet. The cat's. Except the cat was dead. It took 3 days for me to dig the grave. The soil behind the house was hard as bone, filled with roots that clawed back against the shovel. The whole time, the cat lay in the box beside me, wrapped in a white towel. Its fur had dulled, its eyes half open as if reluctant to accept the dark. When I finally buried it, I whispered an apology. I didn't know what else to do. I'd found it on my doorstep, half-starved, mewling weakly. For 2 days it lived in my kitchen, eating bits of fish and sleeping beneath the radiator. It had a notch on its ear and a patch of fur missing from its side, like it had been through too many lives already. Then, on the 3rd morning, it didn't wake up. I remember thinking, at least it died warm. Now, I wonder if warmth was what killed it. The scratching has grown louder. At first, it came at midnight just as I was drifting off. But now it happens any time. When I shower, I can hear it in the pipes. When I sit down to eat, it's beneath the table. Once, I heard it behind the bathroom mirror, as if something were crawling between the walls, tracing my reflection. Last night, the sound moved upstairs. I followed it to the old storage room, the one I hadn't opened since moving in. Dust floated in the air like static. The doorknob was cold under my hand. Inside, boxes leaned against one another like collapsed tombstones. I stepped carefully between them, shining my flashlight across the floor. There, beneath a broken chair, lay something small and gray. A collar. The same frayed red strap I'd found around the cat's neck when it first came to me. The tag was blank, but when I turned it over, a number was scratched into the metal. 10. I dream now in tens. 10 candles, 10 shadows, 10 reflections of myself staring back, each one hollow-eyed and motionless. In the dream, the cat sits beside them, grooming its fur with a tongue made of glass. Each time it lifts its paw, another version of me disappears. When I wake, my reflection lags behind, as if the mirror remembers me slower than it should. I went back to the yard this morning. The grave was open, not dug up, not disturbed. The earth had simply split. The edges were clean, the soil dry, like something had pushed upward from below. The towel was gone. Only a few white hairs clung to the roots. I heard a soft meow behind me. It was distant, but close enough to understand. When I turned, I saw movement near the tree line, a pale shape, weaving between the trunks. It didn't walk like a cat anymore. Its limbs moved wrong, jointed too sharply. And when it stopped, I saw its eyes, 2 gray mirrors catching the light, reflecting not the forest, but me. I ran. There's something strange about the number 10. In folklore, cats are said to have 9 lives, 9 chances to escape death, 9 cycles to cheat it. But what happens after the 9th? Dr. Halbrook calls it residual fixation. I call it the 10th life, the one death couldn't claim. Tonight, I'm writing from the living room, sitting close to the fire. The light feels safe, but every so often, the flames bend backward, as if the air itself is breathing in reverse. The shadows on the wall don't move with me anymore. They move with something else. The last time I spoke to my neighbor, she said she'd seen a cat on my porch. It looked sick, she told me. Its fur was coming off in patches. You should take it in. I laughed, though I didn't feel like laughing. Already did, I said. Her face changed. You shouldn't have, she whispered. I wanted to ask why, but she just shook her head and walked away. Later, I found a note slid under my door. There was no handwriting, only a single muddy paw print and a faint outline of the number 10. The house smelled like dust and fur again. I've started hearing soft thuds in the attic, as if something's pacing in circles. Sometimes, I can feel it watching from the dark corners, the shape of its body pressing against the edges of the room. It's smaller than me, but heavier. It moves like it owns this space. And sometimes, I think it does. I decided to set a camera in the kitchen, just to prove to myself that nothing was there. At 3:12 a.m., something passed across the frame. It wasn't a cat. It wasn't human either. A long, thin shadow crawled into view, stopping beside the sink. Then slowly it rose, stretching upward until it brushed the ceiling. For a moment, the shape of a head appeared, but the face was wrong. Flattened, hollow. Then, as it turned toward the camera, the screen went black. The footage ends there. But when I rewound it frame by frame, I noticed one detail. A faint reflection in the window, just before the blackout. A pair of gray eyes staring back. Mine. It comes closer every night. I feel its breath when I lie in bed, a cool pulse against my neck. Sometimes it whispers a sound like wind or fur-brushing skin. It says my name, not out loud, but inside, in the place where thoughts live. I've stopped turning on the lights. There's no point pretending daylight can save me. The shadows are part of me now, stitched into the walls, the mirrors, the floor. I don't know what's waiting on the other side, but I think I understand now what the number means. 10 isn't the count of lives. It's the price. The 10th life is the one the cat takes back, the one you borrowed, without knowing. And when it comes to collect, it doesn't claw or bite. It just waits for you to forget where your own shadow ends. I'm writing this with the last candle almost gone. The scratching has stopped. For the first time in weeks, the house is quiet, but I can feel something beneath the floorboards. Not moving, just breathing. And when I look down at my hands in the flickering light, they're covered in fur. White, soft, familiar. The candle goes out. Somewhere in the dark, a voice purrs, low and satisfied. Welcome back. The first thing I remember after the dark wasn't pain. It was hunger. Not the kind that gnaws in your stomach, but something older, something that hums beneath your skin, whispering that the body is just a vessel and the vessel is starving. I woke on the kitchen floor. The air was thick with dust, yet I could smell everything. The faint rot of fruit on the counter, the iron tang of the faucet's rust, even the scent of something sweet and decayed under the floorboards. My fingers twitched. They felt strange, too light, too quick. When I lifted my hand, I saw that my nails were longer, not human long, animal long, and the air was moving, as though the house itself were breathing. Each inhale drew the shadows inward. Each exhale let them spread across the walls like ink in water. That's when I heard it again, the soft, rhythmic scratching. Only now, it wasn't beneath me. It was inside me. Days pass differently now. The sun still rises, but it doesn't touch this place. The windows show light, but when I look directly outside, I see only pale silhouettes, figures frozen mid-step, their faces blurred, their hands outstretched as if reaching for something they no longer remember. I recognize some of them. The postman who used to bring me letters, the woman who sold bread at the market, the little boy who once waved at me from his bicycle. They don't move, they don't blink, but their mouths are open, as though waiting for a meal that will never come. I found a book in the attic yesterday. It wasn't there before. The cover was leather, but warm to the touch, as if it had just been held. On the first page, written in a hand I didn't recognize, were the words, "The 10th feast, for those who return, for those who remember." The next page contained drawings crude, like carvings, etched by trembling hands. They showed a circle of figures sitting around a table. Some had faces, some didn't. In the center lay an animal, small, broken, its insides replaced with tiny black seeds. Beneath the image, a line of text, "When hunger becomes memory, memory becomes offering." I traced the words, and for a moment, I could hear purring behind me. When I turned, there was only the book open to the last page, where my name had been written. Tonight, I hear footsteps in the yard, not one pair, many. They shuffle, drag, scrape across the dirt like people who've forgotten how to walk. The sound circles the house, stopping beneath the window. A soft knock, then another, and then a voice. "We remember you." I freeze. It's not a single voice. It's a chorus, 100 whispers speaking as one. I don't answer. The lights flicker once, twice. When they come back on, the window is fogged from the outside. On the glass, drawn in condensation, are 10 fingerprints, each one perfectly aligned. I don't sleep. Not really. When I close my eyes, I see the feast. A long table stretching into blackness, candles burning down to bone-white stubs. Around it sit those pale figures from outside. Only now they have eyes. They look at me. At the head of the table sits the cat, or what's left of it. Its fur is gone, replaced by slick gray skin. Its face is smooth, except for a wide mouth stitched across the front. The mouth opens, and from inside comes a voice that sounds like every whisper I've ever ignored. "You fed me once," it says. "Now it's time I feed you." The figures raise their hands. In each palm glows something faintly human, a flicker of memory, a heartbeat, a face I can almost recall. And then they eat, not with teeth, with remembrance. When I wake, my hands are stained black. Ash? Ink? No, it's the soil from the grave. I rush to the window. The yard is different. The ground is split wider, like something massive has been tunneling below. From that pit rises a faint light, pale, pulsing, almost beautiful. I know I should run, but the hunger moves me forward. I step outside. The air tastes like rain and metal. Every sound feels distant, submerged, as if I'm walking through water. When I reach the pit, I see them. 10 figures, kneeling around the open earth. Their heads are bowed. Their backs twitch with each slow breath. And in the center, something stirs. The cat, or what once was. It's larger now. Its spine bending at impossible angles, its body stitched with lines of light that pulse like veins. It opens its mouth, and from within spills a low, guttural hum that vibrates in my ribs. The 10th life must feed. I understand. I kneel. They bring the offerings. Not food, not flesh, but memories. Each one takes something from within. A name, a face, a fragment of laughter, and lays it at the creature's feet. The memories dissolve into the soil like drops of rain. When it's my turn, I hesitate. The cat tilts its head, waiting. Its eyes are mirrors again, cold and endless. What do I have left to give? I whisper. Its jaw splits wider. Yourself. And, for a moment, I see all 9 lives, the stray silent deaths, the hunger that binds them, the cycle of pity and possession, every hand that ever fed it, every soul it ever touched, every home it ever entered. I see that we were never its saviors. We were its hosts. And the 10th life is the one where the host becomes part of the hunger. The others begin to chant not words, but a low rhythm that feels like breathing. I can feel my chest matching it. The air thickens. My vision narrows. I step closer. The ground feels soft, warm, and then I see them, faces half buried in the soil, eyes open, mouths forming silent screams. The forgotten, the ones who fed before me. Their breath rises from the earth like mist. Their hunger reaches for me. I should run, but something keeps me still. Because for the first time, I don't feel afraid. I feel full. The creature bends its head until its face touches mine. Its breath smells like dust and candle smoke. It whispers, "Now, you will be remembered." Its mouth opens, and I feel something leave me, a thread, pulled from the center of my chest. My memories begin to unravel. My name, my voice, the shape of my mother's face, all slipping into the soil. And as they fade, the cat grows brighter, stronger. Its body reshapes, becoming more human, more like me. The others bow deeper. The feast is complete. When I wake again, I'm standing in the kitchen. Morning light filters through the curtains. The house is still. The smell of dust and fur is gone. Everything is clean. On the table sits a small bowl of milk, and beside it, a cat, perfect white fur, unscarred, bright gray eyes. It looks at me, and for a moment I think it smiles. I reach out a hand. It doesn't move. It just watches, waiting, and I realize what it's waiting for. It's waiting for me to feed it. Because the hunger has to start somewhere. I hear a knock at the door. When I open it, a woman stands there holding a cardboard box. Inside, a small trembling kitten meows up at me. "Found him on the road," she says. "You live alone, right? Maybe you could take care of him?" I look down at the kitten. Its fur is patchy, its ear notched. I smile. "Of course," I say. "He can stay here." The woman thanks me and walks away. I close the door. The air feels warm again. I set the box on the floor. The kitten climbs out, sniffing around, exploring every corner. When it reaches the spot beneath the sink, it stops, scratches once, twice, and then it looks back at me with gray, mirrored eyes. The same eyes I saw in the pit, the same ones I still see when I close my own. I pour the milk. As it drinks, I whisper the words that now rise naturally from my tongue, the words that taste of ash and memory. "Welcome home." And beneath the floorboards, something purrs in approval. The feast begins again. In the end, all of them fed the same hunger, the hunger for being remembered. But every feast must end, and when it does, someone has to take the empty seat. If you ever hear scratching beneath the floor, or see a shadow in the reflection that isn't yours, don't look away, because remembrance is how it begins again.